Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Soul Chess in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 136, Lelouch ends the ring around the romance. Third-person POV. New Year's Eve. Once again a huge party was being thrown at the Shiba Manor in honor of the new year. If there was one thing the Shibas knew how to do, it was throw a fun party. Lelouch joked about how Kyokaku and the family should be broke with the way she spent money on these celebrations like they were water, but apparently between her and Kayan's paycheck and the monopoly the family had on the fireworks and explosives market, money was never an issue. Unlike Kyokaku's extravagant open house parties she had thrown several of in the last few years to celebrate the Soul Society's victory, this was a much smaller private, if but wild, party consisting of invite only. The attendees of the party were Vera, Naomi, Ribatuka, Rukia, Isane, Renji, Yuna, Susanna, Shunsui, Ashido, Tissen, Mari, Lelouch, Ranjaku, Yachiru, Jin, Nimue, Yukatake, Kayan, and Kian besides Kyokaku herself. Many invites had opted to remain with each other rather than show up at Kyokaku's swinging party. This included Stefan and Kendra, Hitsugaya and Momo, and Hisuna and Byakuya. Shisato and Yumi Chika were spending time with the rest of the Aloman family, and Anohana and Rita were enjoying each other's company. Yuriyuki, rather than party, was with Urahara, so iPhone, Tessai, Hinta, and Yururu hosting her own celebration with the shopkeeper in Urahara's basement for the aforementioned individuals and Ichigo and his friends. Kenpeki was off spending his annual tradition of seeing how many fights he could have in a single day, to which he napped all day before so he could stay up all 24 hours awake and looking for people to fight. His current record was 213. So here was everyone at the party and enjoying themselves. Renji and Kayan, drunk off their asses, were currently dancing the kankan on top of the coffee table with saucers of sake in their free arms while they held their arms around each other's shoulders. If not for the fact that this was a more private party, Rukia would have disassociated herself with her husband and friend. Yukatake was happy that at least they were enjoying themselves. The celebration continued way past midnight and straight into the wee hours of the morning, with drinking, story swapping and shenanigans going on until everyone wound up either passed out on the floor or fast asleep from exhaustion. On New Year's Day, meaning when the sun was coming out and everyone had woken up, with everyone either having a hangover or yawning up a storm, the celebration was over and the lull in the atmosphere was about to go from serene to downright depressing. It started when Lelouch heard Yuna's voice from outside in the garden. He followed suit and an active Kyokaku and Ashido followed him. "No, Mari-sama, you can't go. It's only been 7 months. You still have at least a year," Yuna pleaded, tugging on Mari's arm. Mari was looking out over the sunrise with a blue butterfly perched upon her finger as she looked out over the horizon. "Yuna, my stamina is not regenerating. It was inevitable. I actually thought I wouldn't last even this long. I thought I'd be gone before the middle of December." The butterfly flapped away. "It's not fair. You've been here and now you're leaving. It's like you came back only to be cruelly snatched away from me again." Mari turned around and brought Yuna into her arms. "Yuna, it was inevitable. Please be at least thankful that we had this brief time." "Mari-sama," Yuna sobbed into her bosom. Mari sat down and lay against the back of a bush with Yuna kneeling at her side holding onto her and crying as Mari stroked her hair with a smile on her face. "Please don't let the last thing I see of you be you crying, Yuna. Taeko, this is your limit." Ashido stepped forward. "Even now?" she asked. "You will always be Taeko to me, Taeko." Ashido got down on one knee. Unable to walk, Mari waved Ashido over and he came closer to her, whereupon she reached out and ruffled his hair in a motherly manner. "Lelouch, will you come here too?" Mari asked. Lelouch did so and Kyokaku just watched, lighting her pipe. Lelouch squatted down at Mari's right side with Yuna still holding onto her left. "I want you to know that I am very proud of you and what you've accomplished. No matter what you do, as long as you know it is the right thing to do, you will always have my support." "Akari-senpai," Lelouch was moved. "Please don't leave," Yuna sobbed. "I have to, Yuna. I'm sorry. Akari Mari died when she took Vanguard down with her. What I am now is the manifestation of my soul willing me back to existence, if only for a short while. I love you," Yuna exclaimed to Mari. "I know you do, Yuna," Mari stroked her face. I love you too. She lost the strength to continue stroking the 7th squad captain and lay down flat on her back. Yuna then held the greatest woman she ever knew in her arms. Mari continued to smile. Her skin looked as flush as ever, but her body was slowly becoming unable to hold itself together. Ashido. Hi. I am glad you survived. Please do your best to support Yuna and Lelouch. They are survivors of my will. Ashido bowed his head to floor. Your will is my command, Taeko. Yuna, I will always be with you. My heart is yours. Mari's body began to glow faintly. Just a little bit longer. Yuna dripped tears onto Mari's face. I will never forget you. Good. Yuna dove down and gave the woman she loved and idolized the longest kiss she could. Mari used the last bit of energy she had to kiss back. Lelouch and Ashido both could tell how pure of feelings the two women had for each other. With that one last kiss, Mari's body began to dissolve, starting with her legs. She forced a smile. Goodbye, Mari-sama. Goodbye, Yuna. And thank you for all you have given me. That's my line, Yuna responded. I suppose it is. Mari smiled and remained smiling until she had the strength to not even keep her eyes open. Her head tilted to the side and her body dissolved completely into Reishi. Yuna then held her arms over her body and cried helplessly and broken-heartedly. Both Ashido and Lelouch held her to console her. More than to the two of them, Mari had meant the most to Yuna. Mari had been more than a lover to the squad captain. Mari had been like an older sister, a mother, an idol, and a best friend all in the same package. True, Mari was not Yuna's entire world, but she sure felt like it having to watch her go. There goes one of the greatest women in the history of the Soul Society. Kyokaku smiled, fighting tears of her own. Despite not having any deep connection to Mari herself, the situation was as bleak as a funeral. Kyokaku managed to keep herself firm and walked over to help massage Yuna's back. Yuna was still her friend like many of the others still inside the house. We're all here for you, Yuna, Lelouch told her. Let it out. She did let it out. Yuna let out all her tears and Ashido, Lelouch, and Kyokaku helped her until she was able to walk on her own. Yuna then stared out upon the horizon as the sun was coming up. Thank you, she said to her friends, I'm glad I have all of you here with me to share my pain. Lelouch put a hand on her shoulder. Akari-senpai was an amazing woman. No one else in the world will be like her. What you two had many will envy. I know and I will cherish those moments. Right, well if funeral hour is over we have plenty of food inside that needs eating, Kyokaku said, rubbing the back of her neck. Lelouch's stomach growled. Yeah, breakfast sounds nice. Ashido and Kyokaku began to head inside only to notice that Yuna was not following suit. Aren't you coming, Yuna? I'll be along in a second, thank you. Lelouch simply shrugged and went with Kyokaku and Ashido inside. Yuna looked out to the horizon and smiled. Mari-sama, thank you for being with me all this time. Your departure feels like the closing of something very important and I think that with you gone that the start of something new is just around the corner. Yuna then headed inside to continue the celebration with her friends. 2 months later. Winter would soon be ushering itself out with the arrival of spring and with it that meant cramming for exams for Ichigo. Ichigo was focusing on graduating and desiring to go to the college with the best criminal justice program in the country. Tatsuki intended to go into exercise science and open up her own dojo. Orium was enrolling in culinary school. Kigo was going to take up music as a major. Uriah was going into medical science and Chad was interested in accounting. While the teenagers spent weeks and days cramming for finals, the Soul Society caught up on its paperwork and reparations. According to Anohana, the Soul Society could be completely back on its feet in 7 years. During this long, tedious process where the most hectic thing a captain had to do was find their way out of a sea of paperwork, Lelouch found himself delivering a bundle straight to Yuna's desk. Yuna had recovered splendidly from her broken heart. In fact, one would think that nothing had changed, like Mari was still at Orium's place, but Yuna gave the explanation to having good friends to support her and also the fact that she was given closure. While in her office, with Lelouch giving her the nicest, if perhaps flirtatious smile, Yuna had something she needed to say to her fellow captain and she figured it would best be sooner rather than later. Lelich, there's something you and I need to talk about. There is? Lelich asked, confused. Guilty conscience much? Quiet. I've been doing some thinking about our relationship. Oh. What? Haven't you? I have. It's complicated. Well, maybe this'll make things simpler. Yuna took a deep breath. Lelich, I don't know when I started feeling like this, but I don't think we're a match made in heaven. Oh. Lelich seemed almost crushed. He had half expected to have to be the one to put down 2 out of the 3 girls still vying for his companionship, and here Yuna was taking herself out of the competition. What brought this on? Well, a bunch of things. Lelich, I really do like you. I think you're a wonderful person and you're probably the most intelligent one that I met. I sense a but coming. Yuna smiled and chuckled a little at Lelich's sharp wit before continuing, but your dark actions, your cynical drive as a person is something I don't think I could ever get used to. It's not that I don't respect that or think less of you as a person for it, but I was always thinking what it would be like to be attached to someone like that. I think I understand. Lelich held up his hand to stop Yuna from speaking. You didn't know me as well as you thought you did. You still think that I have amazing skill, but you've borne witness to my true nature and it's something you're not comfortable with. Let me ask this then, is there someone else or are you doing this for someone else you think suits me better? I'm saying I think I can find someone else. I do like you, Lelich, but I remembered what made me like you. I was infatuated by you when I first met you and you were so nice to me when Mari-sama wasn't around. You made it easier when I was never able to say goodbye, but I have now and I feel like a whole new person. And now you have and you're questioning your value of me and you understand how hard it is for me and the situation I'm in, Lelich put in the final piece. Yes, Yuna nodded. Lelich smiled, well, I suppose life is funny sometimes. What do you mean? When you died, what you said reminded me of someone I used to know when I was alive. Lelich paused, wondering if he should share this with Yuna. He had sworn to himself that he would only ever share this with the person he would spend the rest of his life with, but Lelich realized that, despite what she was doing, he trusted Yuna very much. He let out a deep breath. Yuna, I'm not living on linear time. He explained to her about the temporal paradox and how he was lost in time, but not understanding what may have exactly caused it. He was in her office for hours explaining to her what only Jin, Hisuna, and Hachugaya didn't know as far as captains were concerned. You thought that I would have been reborn as this girl you know is what you're saying? Yuna asked. Lelich nodded. Yes. I still wanted you near me. I missed you. You and I already resolved what we never made good on the first time, and if this is what you want, then for me, it's enough. So you've been questioning it too then? I've been hoping that you were strong enough to take rejection if it finally came down to that. I'm still mixed up. You, Nimue, and Susanna haven't come to me to demand my companionship and I've been content with just letting things remain as they are. It's easier that way. I've been with Nimue twice now and I care for her deeply, but I had to let her go twice because I was worried about her. I can't keep doing that. Susanna even carried my child once and lost it because fate is a cruel mistress. Yes, the two of them don't have my willpower to remain firm when they've nothing to lean on. Lelich raised an eyebrow, reminding Yuna of her breakdown. You know what I mean, she glared, and Lelich returned to looking at her normally. I've come to know that much from being Susanna's captain. Speaking of which, has she said anything about us? Yuna smirked wryly. A lady is entitled to her privacy, Lelich. You should know that. Even if it meant putting an end to this insanity? One of them is going to be disappointed, Yuna, Lelich spoke sternly. Yuna's face was serious. She never said anything like what you're hoping she might say. She may have hinted at it, but she'd never tell me. I understand. Well, I'm glad you were honest with me like this. I'm glad you're taking it well. I figured you would. So where does this leave us exactly? Like this, Yuna said and gave Lelich a hug. Why, Yuna? This is the most I can give you from now on. Please don't chase after me and change your mind later. I've made up mine. However, I will always be around to help you if you need someone to lean on or someone outside your relationship to speak to. I am your friend, Lelich. I always have been at least that. If you can't think of anyone else to talk to, if even Kyukaku seems like she wouldn't be able to help, you can feel free to come to me. I will always listen to you. Lelouch hugged Yuna back. Thank you, Yuna. You're quite welcome. The two let go of one another and parted ways. Lelouch was disappointed significantly, but it wasn't about to bring him to his knees. Yuna had been his favorite. He didn't want to make things difficult for her by saying anything, and he felt a little humbled to be on the receiving end of rejection for once. At Ashford Academy he'd done the rejecting so many times and he'd never chased after anyone himself. Still, he believed he understood, and he let Yuna's words sink in. He understood that they weren't compatible. To be really good friends with each other was where they needed to be. He didn't have to waste the energy to fight for Yuna. There were still two women he cared about very much who placed him upon a pedestal. Lelouch couldn't make up his mind about who to pick, however. Susanna had been at his side during the Zanpakuto rebellion. She had been loyal to him to a fault and worshipped him, but she never demanded possession of him. It confused him. It was like she was afraid of being hurt, so she held her heart out on a fishing pole. In Nimu's case, however, Lelouch knew he and she had mutual care and desire for each other, and he had had to formally end the relationship with her twice. And of course, in a much similar vein to Susanna, Nimu had made her own place in Lelouch's heart and, unlike Susanna, Lelouch knew she wanted him. The problem was he wanted both her and Susanna, and that's what made things difficult. He decided not to worry about things and just go about his business. He'd have an answer someday. That evening, Susanna dropped papers off with her captain before turning in for the night. As she did, she noticed how Yuna seemed very robust and professional today. Not that this wasn't outside Yuna's norm, but there seemed to be a lack of emotional release within the green-haired captain. Is something the matter, Teiko? Susanna asked Yuna. It's no. Yuna was almost about to dismiss Susanna's inquiry, but she realized the chance she had right now. You, Nimu, and Susanna haven't come to me to demand my companionship, and I've been content with just letting things remain as they are. It's easier that way. Yuna decided not to beat around the bush. I told Lelouch that we weren't right for each other today. Susanna was floored. What? She said flatly. I meant what I told him. I have my reasons, Susanna. She gave the silverette a serious look. And you need to be honest with him. I don't know what you mean. Lelouch Dono knows I love him, and Yuna cut her off, and he also doesn't believe that you want him to be with you. Now that I'm out of the competition, things are much less complicated, and if you keep up the attitude you have, there is a good chance you might lose. Do you really mean it when you say that you don't care if Lelouch isn't with you? You don't have to tell me. You should figure that out on your own. She handed Susanna back a stack of papers and pushed her chair back to stand up. I'm turning in for the night. Please think about what it is your heart wants. Oh, and turn the lights off before you leave. Yuna left Susanna alone and confused in the middle of her office. The sun set completely an hour later, and Susanna was walking along the streets of the Siridi, deep in thought. She wanted to talk to Rangiku. She thought maybe she could get a better understanding of Lelouch and her feelings towards him, if she talked to his direct subordinate. At the same time, Lelouch was headed towards the direction Susanna was coming from. He had just been at the 12th Division, only to find out that Jin had asked something of Nimu, putting her to work and trusting her ability as a vice-captain. Lelouch and Jin had had a long discussion with one another. Lelouch felt a little less concerned about Nimu. Jin made the work environment a much less dangerous place. Nimu was still adjusting to her captain's wit and sarcasm, but she was learning, and Jin said she was still realizing her own value as a vice-captain. Lelouch had long since taught Nimu her own self-value, but Mayuri hadn't let Nimu believe she was anything more than useless. Jin had told Lelouch that she was a pretty good subordinate, much more efficient than Izuru. Lelouch had put him down for disrespecting the deceased, but Jin remarked that he had never much cared for such courtesies. He and Nimu had a pretty good working relationship. It was to the same level as Lelouch and Rangiku's. Lelouch had wanted to speak to Nimu for professional reasons, and perhaps he'd drop what was going on if he saw the opportunity, but she was at 5th Division, delivering something to Hitsugaya. Lelouch was just as much in thought about the whole romance thing as Susanna. He knew that to go to Division 5 he'd have to pass through Division 7 and contemplated speaking to Susanna first, but wondered if she even wanted him to. The two hadn't had a chance to spend much time together recently. The last time they had a large opportunity to spend time back-to-back was when she constructed a grave for Kokuto. At the beach and on New Year's, Lelich hadn't focused a particularly large amount of time to her, and it was the same time he divided up with all his other companions. At this same time, Nemia was on her way back to 12th Division and she was contemplating dropping by 10th Division to talk to Lelich and say something. Now that things were finally over in terms of chaos, she needed to make her point firm. All three individuals were lost in thought about the whole ordeal, and Lelich and one of the two women happened to walk right into the other. Smaller framed and caught off guard, Susanna yelped as she fell backwards onto her ass while Lelich remained standing. "Oh, Susanna. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there." Lelich instinctively reached down his hand to help Susanna to her feet, which she readily accepted. She began dusting herself off after getting to her feet. Thank you," she said quickly. "Were you on your way to my division?" Lelich asked her. Yes, but I wanted to speak to Rangiku about something," Susanna said. "Oh, I see," Lelich said. He continued to walk past Susanna. He hadn't anything further to say to her. Not at the moment. "Please ask her for me if her paperwork is done when you see her." "Why, yes. Yes, I will." Susanna complied. She watched Lelich walk away and was ready to turn back around and the two would go their respective ways. If things kept going like this, unbeknownst to one another, Lelich would run in with Nemu and the conversation would ultimately lead to the two of them finalizing their relationship, leaving Susanna having missed her chance and forever kicking herself. Susanna had the opportunity right now, if she could summon the courage, to take the advice Yuna had given her and be straight with Lelich. She took that chance. "Wait!" Susanna shouted, reaching towards Lelich. Lelich turned halfway towards Susanna, having heard her loud declaration. There was a look of shock on his face. "It's not Rangiku I want to talk to. I want to talk to you. Please, just stay, if that's okay with you." Lelich folded his arms and turned to fully face Susanna. "I'm listening. My whole life, well, maybe not all of it, but for a long time I've been waiting for the right time to tell you how I really feel." "But I know how you feel," Lelich said. "Please let me explain," Susanna said with unnaturally strong conviction for her. "I know my love is real, but I've never been quite sure how to feel. I feel so lost never knowing what to do. We exchange many pleasantries and say goodbye and go our separate ways and I'd watch you walk away. For so long I've never known how to express it and I know one word to express how I really feel. Stay. I don't know how you feel, but please, will you be mine?" Lelich's arm fold collapsed as his arms dropped at his sides. Susanna. "Stay with me, Lelich. Please." Susanna ran towards him until she was close to him, but not violating his personal space. I've always wanted to tell you that I need you, but I'd bail on it, always. I've been scared of getting hurt." Yuna was right, Lelich blinked in awe. I felt that I could convince myself of it if I kept saying that I didn't want you, but would like it if you stayed, but no more." Susanna's eyes welled up with tears. She held up her right arm and bent it at the elbow, holding it out in front of her parallel with the ground, fist clenched slightly, thumb facing her heart. I don't care about the feelings of others. The truth is I'm extremely selfish and I've always wanted you with me. Ever since I knew how I felt about you I wanted you for myself, but Nemia was in the way and so was Rangiku and then you revived Yuna and things became crazy and I didn't know what to do and I'm sure you hate me now and... Susanna kept talking faster and faster until it became impossible for Lelich to understand what she was saying. He walked forward towards her and put a warm hand on her cheek and wiped his thumb underneath her eye and Susanna immediately ceased talking and just stared at Lelich with her mouth hanging open a little. "Those are very normal feelings. I don't hate you. I care a lot about you. During the Zanpakuto Rebellion, during the battle with Talbumasuk, during the battle with your brother and all throughout the Phantoms of Justice I have always cared about you. No, I've cared about you from the moment you became my student. It was a different kind of caring and the level of caring has changed over the course of time, but I have always cared about you, Susanna. I've never wanted you to be hurt. Normally Susanna would ask about Nemiu's feelings right about now, but she suddenly realized how little she cared. Lelich was giving her the time of day. Her heart was pounding and she could hear it in her head. This could be her chance to get what she truly wanted. Lelich Dono, Susanna nearly gagged on his name, she fought the tears threatening to fall as she leaned in to kiss him. Lelich let her and let go of her cheek and grabbed the folds of her shiakusho up by her neck, clenching them together, and Susanna kissed him whilst she tenderly held his face. The kiss was long. Many times the two would break away only centimeters, take small breaths of air before making out again. When it was finally over, Susanna was still almost ready to cry. I can't believe that, in the end, I'm the one who gets you. You aren't having second thoughts now, are you? Lelich asked, still close to her face. And no, but, my entire life I've been treated like an outcast. I told you a long time ago, remember? Yes, I remember, but your silver hair and your red eyes are what make you beautiful. Again, while she would normally find it hard to take a compliment, Susanna was currently caught in the moment, letting her heart guide her. That's so sweet of you to say. She sniffed. No one's ever said that about my eyes and hair before. And no one ever treated me so tenderly until you did. People in the Godii are good to me, but there are others who dislike me, who distrust me. People avoid me even in Rukanga. I always thought my entire life would be like that. I thought I'd find myself crying in a fetal position at night until one day I'd have enough and end it. Perish such thoughts, Lelich told Susanna. I won't ever leave you alone. This time I mean it when I say it. I promise that forevermore that I am yours so long as you want me. I want you forevermore. Stay. I will, Lelich said. Overcome with emotion, Susanna grappled her arms around Lelich's torso, sobbing into his chest. I'm so happy that I get to have you, she said weakly. Lelich felt that saying anything in response was unnecessary. He just held Susanna. He had made his decision. He wondered how he would have to break it to Nemiu, but that's when he sensed her Ryotsu retreating from the area. He closed his eyes in solace, wondering just how much she might have seen or heard. He'd have to make it firm where they stood with one another. He considered perhaps experimenting on her. No, I'm not her father. That is out of the question to fix the situation by altering her emotions through experimentation or using geese. I will simply have to do the noble thing and explain to her the truth. Say it to me, Susanna snapped him from his thoughts. Say what? He asked her. Susanna looked at him with those pleading red eyes of hers. He seemed to realize what she was asking just from her expression. I love you. He told her. Susanna nuzzled contentedly into Lelich's chest, hands on his shoulders. Lelich held her to him with his arms around her. I'm so happy. I'm glad. And I'm glad you were finally honest with me. Me too. 7th Division. Yuna was in her personal quarters reading a book before going to bed when someone knocked on the door. Her visitor was a troubled Nemiu. And Nemiu-chan, is everything all right? Nemiu shook her head. Lelich-sama and Shapen-san are with each other. Yuna understood how Nemiu meant that from her tone and expression. What that didn't explain was why Nemiu came to tell her that. The artificial Soul Reaper was quick to explain. I calculated what to do. Nemiu was swallowing between every other word as if she was doing everything she could not to cry. The odds of reconvincing Lelich-sama are next to impossible. However, to confront my feelings, and I thought also that. Yuna cut her off. I told Lelich I wasn't vying for him anymore. Nemiu was surprised. I have my reasons, but, Yuna held Nemiu, if it's comfort you want, I can give you that. I'm right here. Go ahead. Nemiu confronted her feelings. Yuna's warm embrace kept Nemiu's broken heart from shattering. She soothed Nemiu with her words until the 12th Division vice captain was all done. The next day Lelich confronted Nemiu to explain to her where they stood, telling her that he could always be the big brother she had originally seen him as. There are plenty of people for you to meet and fall in love with, Lelich told her, hands on her shoulders. I'm sure you'll meet the right person one day, Nemiu. If that is what you believe, then I shall believe too. You have always guided me properly, Lelich-sama. I shall continue to believe in you. Lelich was puzzled. I didn't expect you to be so understanding. He let go and stood up, having been leaning over her desk to talk to her. What do you mean? Nimue asked. Well, I half expected you to snap into a psychotic frenzy and kill Susanna, or me. Here. Iin Tamashi put forth her agreement of Lelich's assessment. It's strange, Nimue put a hand upon her breast. Perhaps it is because Ichimaru Teiko has been good to me, or perhaps it's because I was able to be comforted by Homura Teiko, but I don't feel angry at all. You don't? Can you get her to say that again? No one besides you and me are going to believe she just said that. Would you be quiet? You weren't chatty at all last night, this is hardly the time for you to be opening your mouth. Rar. Feisty. Lelich mentally growled, but understood Iin Tamashi was just being her usual self. No, I don't, Nimue responded to Lelich. And I would never hurt you, ever. You have been good to me all of my life. Though my heart hurts, it would not justify taking you away from what makes you truly happy, and Shapen-san is my friend. That's never stopped other people before, Lelich scratched his head. I'm not other people. I am myself. Lelich laughed, that's certainly true. The tense atmosphere that had started the conversation was all but gone now. Lelich and Nimue understood where they were with each other. They smiled at each other until Nimue broke the silence. I should get back to work. Ah, yeah, and I need to as well. Lelich left the R&D department. A couple of days later, Lelich asked Byakuya to accompany him somewhere on one of their slow days. As a friend, Byakuya agreed. He was surprised when Lelich walked straight into a jewelry store and began looking at rings. Lelich hadn't made a big announcement about his and Susanna's relationship, and it hadn't been very long, and since things had been business as usual in the Godai, not many people knew. It just never came up. When Lelich told Byakuya what he was up to, he added, I asked you accompany me because you've been through this before. I don't know what kind of ring to get Susanna. I felt you would understand my view of wanting my purchase to be perfect. The corner of Byakuya's mouth turned upward momentarily. Yes, I believe I know what you mean. If you want my advice, then, you should purchase something symbolic. If you'd like, do not even consider money an issue. I will aid you in your purchase despite that you have not asked for it. It is the least I can do for all you have done for my family and me over the many years we have known each other. Thank you, though I doubt I'll need such financial aid. Lelich looked around the store and finally decided upon his purchase. The ring he purchased was a double helix of sparkling diamonds. He believed it was symbolic of how his and Susanna's fates had always been intertwined. After all, Susanna came to the Siriti because Yuna found her in Rukanga. Yuna was out there because Mari died and Yuna wanted vengeance. Lelich had known both before the latter's death. It was like from the moment he became a member of the 10th Division, he was destined to meet Susanna. At least that's how it felt in the grand scheme of things. The ring was the most expensive of its kind, and it cost Lelich an arm and a leg. His wallet would be pretty much empty until his next paycheck. Lelich felt Susanna was worth it though. When he wondered how to propose to her, Byakuya offered a suggestion. He got Lelich and Susanna a reservation at one of the fanciest restaurants in the Noble District, funded mainly by the Kukaki family. It was a formal dinner, so Lelich and Susanna needed to wear something nice. Lelich got all dressed up in a white suit jacket and pants with a pale blue-violet dress shirt. He looked positively regal. He arrived first wondering what Susanna might look like. She'd never been one for formal gatherings, and even when she did, she didn't like to do much and preferred not to stand out. He was looking in the other direction when she finally arrived. Sorry to keep you waiting. I would have been here sooner, but these heels are a pain. That's okay. Lelich turned his head to see Susanna, floored by her appearance. Lelich, for the first time, was like a deer caught in headlights as he looked at Susanna. Sure, she'd appeared beautiful to him before, but not like she was right now. She was wearing a bright yellow dress made from lyocell that didn't cover her arms and sported a bit of cleavage. The dress came down only a little bit past her knees. Susanna was wearing high heels that matched her dress. She was wearing a bracelet on her right arm as well as fire engine red nail polish. She was wearing dark eyeshadow and glossy pink lipstick. Lelich also took note that Susanna had bothered to style her hair as well. She normally just let her hair cascade around her in whatever fashion it wanted to, but right now she had parted her bangs to the side and had a bun in the back of her hair with the rest of her hair in a single braid. She was wearing a pair of amber earrings that were 3 inches long and shaped like teardrops. What? Susanna was self-conscious. Does it look bad? I did this myself and I'm not the greatest test when it comes to fashion, but she stopped when she saw Lelich shaking his head. Why, you look amazing. Really? Susanna felt elevated into the sky. Yes, absolutely, Lelich nodded. I just, wow. Susanna laughed at the sight of Lelich being speechless. I didn't even know you owned something like this. Well, not until today. When you asked me to dinner, I accepted without a second thought since we're going out, but I didn't know what I'd do since I didn't have anything extremely nice. I went out and got all of this. Wow, someone's got dedication. For once we agree on something. So come on, let's go inside. As one might expect, Susanna got eyes on her when she entered, but she felt that there was something different in the gazes being sent her way. It was like they were eyeing her with interest. She clung to Lelich as she held onto his arm, not understanding. It seems your actions are having a positive effect. People are looking at you because they think you're attractive. Susanna blushed. But if they know what's good for them, they'll keep their hands off. Susanna smiled, feeling comforted by the sour, possessive way Lelich said that. Lelich went up to the receptionist to get their table, giving the man his reservation information Byakhia had given him earlier that day. Dinner was normal. Lelich wasn't about to pull the old cliché of the ring in the wine glass or the moment he and Susanna sat down. No, he wanted things to go right so it would be long after dinner when he set his proposal into motion. Susanna loved the food she and Lelich ordered. The night was still relatively young when they left the restaurant. They held hands as they walked, with Lelich leading Susanna where he wanted to take her. His desired location was a classroom within the Shino Academy. It was after hours so they were all empty. It had been more than 100 years since she had been at the academy, but when she stepped into the room and looked all around, Susanna recognized where she was. This is your old first-year classroom. This is where you and I first met. Susanna walked around. It's so nostalgic being here. She walked around until she sat down in her old seat only for something to obstruct her butt from reaching the seat itself. Lelich had snapped his fingers just as Susanna was sitting down, removing the kyoko he had cast on the small box he had planted much earlier that day. Susanna saw the box that hadn't been there before. I can't believe you remembered where I Saturday. I have a good memory, was all Lelich said. Susanna picked up the box, heart pounding, wondering if this was what she thought it was. Inside was a double helix ring with a note attached to the inside top of the box. It only said one word, please. Lelich smiled at Susanna in the kindest way possible. I wanted to make this as special as possible. Susanna closed the box and walked towards Lelich. It's been special from the moment you and I kissed the other night. Are you sure? I don't think I've ever been more certain of a decision before. Susanna opened up the box again and looked at it. Oh Lelich Dano, she sniffed. Lelich walked around behind her and hugged her around her shoulders, putting his head alongside hers. Still with the honorifics. I don't think I'll ever stop. I mean before it was just out of respect and lack of closeness, but now it's my affectionate way of addressing you. Does that mean you accept? Lelich asked. Susanna put on the ring as quickly as she could, turned around and hugged Lelich. Of course it does. I love you. And I love you too. To make sure that the wedding was 100% the way he wanted it, Lelich spent the entire planning stage on hand. Since Susanna had no one to give her away, down the aisle she came completely alone. Lelich thought she looked heavenly. The room was packed with pretty much every Soul Reaper Lelich knew. Despite not being a noble, Lelich's wedding had almost as big a turnout as Rukia and Kayan. It had come as quite a shock to the captains and the vice-captains when Susanna and Lelich each made the announcement at a respective regular meeting for their rank. After the revelation, Renji and Kayan promptly forked over a fair sum of cash to Rukia, the former cussing as he took out his wallet. All three had made a bet about Lelich's chosen bride. At the reception, fate eventually had Renji finding himself talking to Nimue. He had noticed how little fun she was having, despite Rangiku, Jin and Isane's individual efforts. "Hey," he told her, "I know what it's like to feel like you just lost the love of your life. If you ever need someone to talk to that knows a little bit of what you're going through, feel free to drop by my office. I appreciate the sentiment, Aburaifu Kotaiko, thank you." Lelich had asked Kyokaku to handle the reception planning since all of her parties were huge hits. The reception was not at the Shiba Manor, so Kyan was thankful he would not have to pay out his pocket if something exploded. Instead, Kyokaku would. Lelich and Susanna left the reception early to go on their honeymoon. Lelich found the most serene beachside hotel resort in the world of the living and booked it. Susanna made her attempt once they were settled to drag Lelich to the bed, but he was contemplating something and she could sense his troubled state from the tenseness in his shoulders and upper arms. "Lelich Dono, is everything okay? Now that we're married, there's something I need to tell you." "Well, actually, a lot of things I need to tell you. I don't want there to be any secrets between you and me." Lelich stood up from the chair at the table he was sitting at. "Susanna, please sit on the bed and listen to me." Lelich told Susanna about everything he had been through prior to coming to the Soul Society and explained to her his temporal misplacement and what would eventually happen. Susanna started crying through the middle of her husband's tale. She could almost feel his pain. "I wanted you to know all of this. You have a right to know." Susanna stood up and hugged Lelich. "I didn't realize how much you'd suffered as well. Lelich Dono, why did you keep so much inside you? How did you manage it?" "I don't know. Well, from now on, I will share that suffering." "No," she rethought her words, "from now on, you don't have to suffer any longer." She pulled her head back to look up at the man she loved. "You don't have to worry. I will always be here. You will never lose me." She held up Lelich's hands. "I promise that I will never sacrifice myself for you. I will shield you if I must, but only if I know I shall survive. I don't want you to suffer. You've been through so much." Susanna sniffed. "Susanna," Lelich wrapped his arms around her and kissed her. It eventually led to the newlyweds copulating. Although it was not their first time being alone, it felt just as special. When it was over, Susanna cuddled in Lelich's arms as they lay down together. "Lelich Dono. Will you always be at my side, forever and ever and ever? You're my wife now." "Of course I will, as long as you'll do the same, of course." Susanna snuggled further in. "I won't leave you alone. I promised you that earlier. Our suffering ends with our union." Lelich held Susanna closer. "Let fate guide it to be true. It will be, and one day we will make up for what happened before the battle with Talbumasuk. But only when we're ready," Lelich told Susanna. "Yes," she answered. "Sweet dreams." "Same to you." And with that, Lelich fell asleep. And, for the first time in his life, he felt genuinely happy. He felt that what Susanna said was really true. He felt like he was suffering no longer. End of chapter 136. Chapter 137, Ichigo Story Mode, End. Third-person POV. It was mid-April. High school for Ichigo was officially over and he'd soon be moving out of his house and taking up residence elsewhere to be ready for college life starting in September. He wouldn't be spending his final summer in Karakura town. All of his friends were moving out already, so he figured he should too. The moment the academic term ended, Kensei and Mashiro both left the system and booked the first flight they could out to the Britannia mainland. Lisa had decided she might take up modeling to the far north of the country. Notably, this would mean a long-distance relationship with her and Chizuru, assuming it would be a lasting one, though then again Ichigo and Orium were about to go their separate ways when they left too. Ichigo and his friends had all agreed that they would all leave for their individual destinations on the same day. Ichigo's destination was Kyoto Gakuen University. A long way from home to be sure, but Ichigo felt he just had to go somewhere else. Orium, much to his chagrin, was taking college in Tokyo. So iPhone and Yuriyuki were both staying in Karakura town. Despite no longer being required to be a teacher in the Karakura school system, so iPhone had grown accustomed to her teaching job and said she was rather enjoying it. Right now it was late at night and it was a warm spring evening. Patrol was rather messy tonight, as Ichigo was finding. Ichigo was sort of chuckling after every few kills, considering that if these hollows had waited a few weeks they wouldn't have to put up with him. Yoshino was the only member of his nakama staying in Karakura town. She had said she wanted to give Urayu a home to come to when he was not enrolled for the semester, leading to teasing about whether she or Urayu had copulated yet. Urayu turned red and barked like a dog about how indecent it was to prod his privacy like that. Yoshino, however, simply smiled slyly, put a finger to her lips and said, "That is a secret." Since she was staying in Karakura town, Ichigo said that he trusted her to keep things safe since everyone else was moving on. Of course, with Soifone and Yoriyuki sticking around, Yoshino knew she wouldn't exactly be alone. So here was the young adult, currently dispatching yet another hollow before trying to see if he could pick up any others. As he picked up another one, he dreaded to think where he might be if he had never trained under Lelouch. Urahara had taught him basic skills and Lelouch had flushed him out into a full-fledged warrior. Ichigo was sharper of mind, more cautious in tactics, and bother quicker and stronger in combat. If Ichigo had not trained under Lelouch, he would be only half as strong as he was now. And if not for his hollow completely backing him up, Ichigo wasn't sure how weak he would be at this point. He hadn't needed his Getsuga Tensho the entire rest of the semester, and before Lelouch trained him he had spammed the thing regularly. That said a lot. Ichigo slew yet another monstrosity with a swing of his sword, and when he sensed no hollows in the immediate area he dropped to the ground and patted himself down to flatten his clothes against his body as he put Zanjutsu away behind his back. He listened to how quiet the night was and it brought a sense of calm to him. The moon was full as it lingered high above his head. Ichigo took a moment to reminisce about all he had been through since the April of his freshman year. He smirked as he found it difficult to wonder how his life might have been if he and Rukia might never have met. The more he thought about it though, the more it seemed like to him as if becoming involved with the Soul Society was inevitable. After all, his dad was a Soul Reaper, former anyway, and long-distant cousin of one of the two most powerful noble families in all the Soul Society. After the clash with Aizen, many of the noble families had been eradicated, having either fallen in battle to ensure Byakuya's escape from the city, destroyed in the ensuing battle against Ulquiorra, or vigorously defied Aizen when he took over and were given death as punishment. The fallen nobles included the other two major standing powers in the Soul Society, though Ichigo couldn't recall their names. Not that he cared. Soon the Soul Society would just be a distant ally, with the only tangible things linking him to it being Kon and his badge. Ichigo was rudely jarred from his thoughts by the sensation of a nearby hollow, and he rushed off to take care of it, but upon arrival he saw it locked in combat with a Soul Reaper with short, marigold blonde hair and eyes to match. Her Ryutsu was incredibly weak compared to him and his friends, but she appeared even with the hollow she was up against. The hollow she was fighting looked like he was composed of many sharp rocks for a body. He had arms and legs and an incomplete face with a skull head, but his lower jaw and left eye were missing. Her sword smashed against its tough exterior as the girl tried to turn the tide and get at the mask. Ichigo decided to lend a helping hand and leapt into the fray to take the battle. "You must be the new representative," Ichigo said, back to the girl. "Yeah, that's me. Are you?" Ichigo turned around to face her. "Kurosaki Ichigo," Ichigo said and held up his badge, "Substitute Soul Reaper." The girl's mouth hung open and she dropped to all fours in what she believed was due respect. "Ah, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Kurosaki-sama. If I had known you were on patrol I would have sought your aid immediately instead of charging off alone." Whoa, you don't have to get all formal and everything, I'm just a normal guy, you know." "Unacceptable," the girl held up her head and glared at Ichigo in offense. "I am the successor to one of the 10 remaining noble families in the Soul Society at Tremere Senna." "A Tremere?" Ichigo was caught off guard by the last name. "Wait, then, are you?" Senna stood up and put her Zanpakuto away and held her hand on the handle. "Hi, I am the younger sister of a Tremere Talbumasuk, the man who was killed as a high traitor by the Soul Society itself." I see." Senna looked to the side. Her expression was a bit more melancholy. "A lot is expected of me. My brother tarnished our family name, but even before his defection my family was already lost. It was destroyed by the phantoms of justice because my father threw himself in league with Aizen Sosuke, but was returned to us by the captain of Squad 10, Lamperouge Lelich, who sacrificed the land he had been given to start his own clan to give my mother and I back ours. Lelich did that? But the Phantoms are his group. Why would he? Ichigo was tempted to tell Senna, but decided against it. He realized it was not his place to say. So you're the youngest of your family, huh? Ichigo asked, scratching his head. Senna nodded and looked at Ichigo with a confident stare. As I said, there is a lot expected of me. If my mission goes well, I'll be acknowledged as a full-fledged Soul Reaper. Hands are short, so rather than send me through the academy, strings were pulled and I was given special training to test my abilities and skill. This is my final test. If I can prove that I can handle work in the world of the living, I'll be given a seat and squad assignment without having to go to the academy at all. I have to atone for the shame wrought upon my family by my father and brother. It's what matters to me the most. Senna put her hand on her arm and looked melancholy again. Nii-san, he never forgot what mattered most to him. In the end, he just wanted to make mother and me happy. Lamperouge Teiko found a locket belonging to my Nii-san. He looked so happy arm in arm with this violet-haired Arrancar woman. He seemed truly happy even if he was going against the Soul Society. During the raid on Hueco Mundo, a journal was found. Apparently my brother wanted to turn all the hollows in Hueco Mundo into Arrancar. But that's... Senna cut Ichigo off. He didn't want to do it with any ill intent. She fumed. Nii-san saw how Arrancar gave the beastly hollows a vast amount of intelligence. He thought it might bring some sort of peace between hollows and Arrancar if he could engineer them to having the choice between being evil or neutral. Senna looked down and clenched her fists. I do not have the intelligence, nor would anyone dare to continue my brother's illegal research, but he was not a bad person, not deep down. She misses him, that much is clear. Ichigo reached out and put a friendly hand on Senna's head, surprising her. He was a good brother when you lived together. It's obvious you looked up to him. I miss him, Senna said and looked up at Ichigo with an expression that read, "You just kicked my puppy." That just shows how good of a brother he was. Ichigo smiled at her only to frown, but you can't dwell on the past, it'll only kill you inside. You're lucky you don't have to carry the burden of blaming yourself for your brother's death, it'll ease the pain. Still, the best you can do is walk with both your feet forward and live for him too. Senna's eyes turned kind. Thank you. Why are you thanking me? It's just, no one cares about my feelings at all when they talk about my brother. Senna took a few paces back and held her hands over her chest. I know what he did went against the Soul Society, but like you said, he was a good brother. Everyone just blames him for what he did and takes it out on me. She gave Ichigo a confident look. But I'm going to show them that the Tremiers were once a noble clan indeed. We will become a respected name amongst the 10 clans. The chat would have continued, but a hollow's roar interrupted Senna and Ichigo's discussion and the former's soul pager went off. Don't bother with that, Ichigo said, turning around, I can sense it from here. Just follow me around and try to keep up. Okay. Senna nodded. As they headed off together. So, Ichigo said, glancing back at Senna, how long is your post for? May 15th, Senna responded. Wow, that's exactly 1 week after I leave, Ichigo thought out loud. And a little too loud since Senna heard him, you're leaving. Yeah, I'm moving on for college and there aren't any universities in Karakura Town or Naraki City that have my major, Ichigo stated, but I think for your last week you'll be okay by yourself. After all, I can help you get stronger by then. Get stronger? Senna asked. You want to make those around you proud of you, right? Well, you'll need to get stronger to show that you can handle the responsibility of being a Soul Reaper. It's a tough job, you know. I wasn't always as strong as I am now. You won't get nearly as strong as me, but I can teach you the ropes. Honto? Senna asked, delighted. Sure, I'm sure there will be some slow patrols. It's not like I'd have anything better to do. Arigato gozaimasu, Kurosaki-sama. Ichigo, just call me Ichigo, Ichigo said, irritated. No, that's way too informal for a branch member of the Shibas. Well, I don't like being addressed formally. It's annoying. Then with your permission, Ichigo-sensei. You'll be tutoring me after all. Ichigo sighed, "Suit yourself." And it was so. Ichigo spent his evenings mentoring the inexperienced young noble. Senna's speed, strength, and endurance increased with Ichigo helping her every step of the way. At the end of 3 weeks she had learned much under Ichigo's guidance. She began to idolize the substitute Soul Reaper. She even began hanging around him during the day. Ichigo didn't realize that he had slowly gained a fan. Orium thought it was cute how much Senna looked up to Ichigo as a role model. Ichigo wasn't too thrilled with the prospect however. He didn't think he was the best person to look up to, but for Senna it just made him seem humble and gave her even more of a reason to find him endearing. Eventually though it was time for them to part ways. A sad day to be sure, but Senna did so with a smile on her face. It was May 7th, the night before Ichigo would leave tomorrow. The night had been slow and the two had spent the evening getting one last training session in. It was 6 a.m. and Ichigo had to get to his body so that he would be able to get himself up in time for his train tomorrow. As Senna stood panting with her sword stretched out with Ichigo barely breaking a sweat, Ichigo could see how far she had come as a warrior. He was satisfied with where he had gotten her. From this point forward she would take her sword and cut her own path. Ichigo put Zanjutsu away. Senna dropped to one knee in exhaustion, her Zanpakuto at her side, hand on her knee. She continued to pant. "You've come a long way, Senna. Talbumasuk would be proud of you. The Soul Society will recognize your skill." "Thank you, Sensei," Senna said. "This next week Karakura town is yours to defend. Prove to not only me, but to yourself and to your family that you have what it takes to be a Soul Reaper." "Hi. It's in your hands now, Senna, for this term anyway," Ichigo said and held out his hand to help his pupil to her feet. "Good luck." "Arigato," Senna took her hand and held it, squeezing it tightly. "I look forward to the next time we meet, Ichigo-sensei." "I do too," Ichigo said and let go of Senna's hand before beginning to walk away. "Ah, wait, can I come see you off tomorrow?" Senna asked. "If you wanted to you should have said something earlier. My train leaves in a few hours. You'd better get your rest. You may not realize it, but your mind and body are exhausted. It'll take your soul a little while longer to catch up." "Well then, until we meet again," Senna called to Ichigo. He just waved his hand through the air signaling his departure. The next morning, Ichigo and Orium stood in front of the platform to her train. She was the second one leaving. Tatsuki's train had already taken off. Heartfelt goodbyes were exchanged and the girl was off to the eastern side of the country. Now Ichigo would give the toughest temporary goodbye of his life. Orium had become the center of his world to a certain extent. It would be tough staying apart from her. "I'll call you, okay? I promise. I'll even send you things in the mail," Orium swore. Ichigo smiled and held her to him, one hand at the back of her head, the other around her waist. Orium wrapped both arms around his waist. "I'll always be with you no matter how far apart we are. And I'll come visit. And we'll get to see each other during breaks too." "I'm going to miss you," Orium told her boyfriend. "Me too, but we'll see each other again." "That doesn't make this any easier. You sure you won't change your mind?" Ichigo asked. "You have your path and I have mine, but they'll reconnect again soon. You don't have to worry about me, I'll always be yours." "And you," Ichigo told Orium. He lifted her head up to look him in eye, leaned down and kissed her. It was long and passionate and when they broke away Ichigo said to her, "You've made me the happiest I've been in years. You're the white sun that lights up my darkness." Orium's eyes waters at how sweet it was for Ichigo to say that to her. She gave her boyfriend another hug. Now boarding for Tokyo. Orium's train pulled up. "Do you need help?" Ichigo asked her. "No, I'm good. I'm traveling light. Besides, I have wheels," Orium said, grabbing her luggage. She entered into the train car and looked back towards Ichigo. The last Ichigo saw of his girlfriend before the door closed was her smiling face sent his way. "You're okay not going where she is?" Ishine asked, coming up behind his son. "We decided we wouldn't let our relationship interfere with our education. We wanted the best opportunities for ourselves. It was difficult, but we worked it out." "You really wanted to go to a college in Tokyo, didn't you?" Shut up, Ichigo said dryly, I told you we worked it out. Besides, I know she can take care of herself. I am going to miss not seeing her though. Gonna have to go back to the magazines eh? Shut up, Ichigo said, elbowing his dad in the back of the neck. Oh ow 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 ow. So you're really going to go huh, Ichi and I. Ichigo's sisters came up dragging some of Ichigo's luggage behind them. It's my future, Ichigo told his sister. He then looked to Yuzu, whose eyes were watering as she trembled with every sniff. You call okay? Every day okay. Yuzu choked back tears and then rushed towards her big brother and hugged him tightly. No. Unii-chan. She sobbed. I don't want you to go. Ichigo pat his sister's head, neck, and back. Hey, come on Yuzu, I'll be fine and I'll come home during breaks. Everything's going to be fine. You'll always be my little sister. Ishine, while Yuzu was still in her brother's arms, walked up to Ichigo and put a fatherly hand on his shoulder. This is the right decision, you know. Ichigo smirked, yeah, I hear you. And thanks Dad, for everything. Yuzu moved out of the way and Ichigo and his dad shared a manly father-son hug. Ichigo then sighed. Something the matter? Ishine asked. Do you think Mom would be proud of me, if she saw me today? Ichigo asked. Your mother would want you to be happy, Ichigo. Do what you want to do and never look back. She's the woman that loved you and gave her life protecting you, Ishine told Ichigo. Then that's what I'm going to do, Ichigo said and then looked out into the horizon at the clouds. Something else the matter? Ishine asked him. I was just thinking. Karakura town is my turf, my ground. Who's going to protect it while I'm not here? I don't mean from hollows or the like, Senna has that covered for the next week. I mean from regular jerk-offs, like Needles. I'm sure it'll be just fine without you and when you get back it'll be like you never left. Just don't worry about it and be the best college student you can be, Ishine told him. I will, Ichigo brightened up. Now boarding for Kyoto. A subway car pulled up behind Ichigo and the others. That's my train, Ichigo said and turned around to enter it. Bye guys. He said grabbing his suitcase, small shoulder bag the rest of his luggage. Have good time. Karen waved. You do well you hear boy. Stay safe Unii-chan. Yuzu called out. He entered into the railway car and it closed behind him. As it went down the station, Ichigo saw the rest of his friends waving as his train left the station. Ichigo was also surprised to see Urahara, Soifone, and Yoriyuki at various spots along the station, waving goodbye to him as well. Ichigo waved back. When the train was far out along the open railway trailing along the trees, he stood near an empty bench and watched Karakura town fly by as the train rushed by. As he did, he sensed a Ryotsu. He immediately opened a window and stuck his out to look. There was a Soul Reaper running alongside him along the telephone wires. She smiled at him. Ichigo smiled back. You get back to the Soul Society, he jeered in jest, do you want to get arrested again? Nothing was said as he just watched the Soul Reaper keep up with the train as she ran alongside it. Still, I'm glad you came to see me off, he called out to her, I look forward to the day you and I will meet again, Rukia. The Squad 3 lieutenant simply nodded to him and then stopped as the train pulled ahead of her. Yes, until we meet again Ichigo, goodbye. A Senkaimon opened behind her with a hell butterfly to take her back. She took her break to see him off as she requested and now it was back to work. She had a lot to do as the 3rd Division lieutenant and she intended to do the best job she could. See you, Rukia said as the Senkaimon began to close behind her. You've become so strong Ichigo. Farewell my friend, until we meet again. A few months later. As Ishine expected, Karakura town was just fine without Ichigo. Most of the thugs he dealt with on a regular basis were now old enough to be caught by the cops and many of the Yakuza wannabes either got hauled in for their actions or killed by the actual Yakuza. Still, Karakura town was far from the nicest place on earth. There were still purse snatchers, rapists, and thugs and even the high school had its fair share of problems. Take this particular morning for instance, the start of the summer semester. Ichigo's younger sister, Kurosaki Yuzu was being set upon by a bunch of Needle's spiritual successors. Yuzu, clutching her lunch bag as the only personal belonging she'd brought with her. Everything else she would need was in her desk, backed away, trying not to get hurt. "Please don't hurt me," she begged. She backed up only for another thug to be right behind her and grab her under the arms. Yuzu screamed. "Hey! Leave her alone. Cheese it!" one of thugs shouted. Yuzu was dropped onto her ass and everyone ran away like a bunch of cowards. Walking up the street, lollipop dangling from her mouth, leather jacket firmly affixed over her school uniform, sunglasses affixed upon her face, black leather gloves attached to her hands was Kurosaka Karen. She walked over to Yuzu and helped her up. "Thanks Karen, you're a real lifesaver," Yuzu said. Karen lowered her sunglasses to look her twin in the eye. "You can't let people like that bully you all the time, Yuzu. You gotta stand up for yourself once in a while," Karen told her. "I'm sorry, but thank you. I'm really glad you're my sister," Yuzu told her. "I wish I could be tough like you, Karen." "You don't need to be tough, just get some self-respect for yourself," Karen responded. Karen had done her best in the last couple of months to fill Ichigo's shoes. Ever since middle school she knew this day would come that she and Yuzu would have to look out for themselves. She had already built up a nasty reputation and while she hadn't gotten a title yet, she was hoping to eventually get one. She was also currently the only girl that was enough of a badass since Arisawa, Noble Dragon, Tatsuki. "Now come on, we're going to be late for class." Right behind you." Yuzu followed her sister into the school. As they walked up the street to the front entrance, a bunch of freshmen jumped out of the way like Karen had a disease as she passed by, frightened of her. Everyone knew the reputation of Ichigo's younger sister. Others were also afraid to mess with her because someone who did could be due for a delayed beating when Big Brother came home on break if they managed to outfight her. Karen took full advantage of it as she loved feeling like she was in charge. "Out of the way. Make way. Coming through." Soul Reaper's younger sister heading this way. Karen and Yuzu made their way to class and sat down in their respective seats with Karen looking out the window. "Good morning, Karen-san." Karen looked to her right to see a black-haired, soft-spoken girl standing next to her. "Oh, hey Tsumugi ya-san," Karen said with a lazy expression as Yurura sat down next to her. She then rolled her eyes backwards towards Yuzu's seat, making sure Hinta wasn't about to waltz in and make a move on her twin. He hadn't even entered the classroom yet from the looks of it. The door opened and a woman with long ink black hair entered the room with a sorry-looking Hinta following suit. Karen and Yurura laughed to themselves, Yurura much more subtly. Hinta sourly went to his seat. "Good morning Feng-sensei," Karen said to her teacher. "Morning Kurosaki," so iPhone said as she glazed over her lesson plan while she stood behind her desk. Sighing to herself, Karen looked to the side out the window. The sky was mostly clear and the weather was warm. Out in the park across the way, Senna, reassigned the post she was given, having done a fantastic job before and now the proud 20th seat of Squad 10, was locked in combat with a hollow. The creature was shaped like a serpent and had no arms or legs. With its mighty tail it attacked Senna as she dodged to the side. She then took a fierce leap into the air and held her blade high above her head at a 45-degree angle, angled backwards behind her head, a stance that Ichigo had taught her. She came fiercely down upon her victim and sliced its mask. She then spun her sword and cleanly sheathed in her scabbard. She looked up towards the sun and wiped her brow as she admired the summer day. Halfway across Japan, Ichigo was walking to his university to scope the place out. Out in Tokyo, Orium was doing the same thing. In the Soul Society, Lelouch and Susanna were at Byakuya and Hisona's backyard pool playing with the twins, Rukia, Kyan, and Kyukaku. Hisona noticed that Byakuya was staring up at the sky. "What is it, dear?" Hisona asked, but Byakuya didn't respond. He knew, however, just like everyone else that was admiring the summer sun, that a new chapter in the Wheel of Fate was turning. Only by moving forward would those within its path know what was in store. End of chapter 137. Ichigo Story Mode, End. Chapter 138, Cornelia Story Mode, Start. Third-person POV. Britannia Mainland. April 2004 ATB. With Ichigo graduating and things moving as normal, what was considered normal there, things were rather pleasant and routine, both for the teen and the captain of Squad 10, Lamperouge Lelich. However, while their journeys were slowing to a crawl, the dawn on the journey of another was just rising. On the other side of the Prime Meridian, in the estate of Pendragon, a new heroine was breaking into her stardom, second princess, second lieutenant in the Imperial Army. Cornelia Lee Britannia was just starting her journey. It would not be a journey like Ichigo and Lelich's. Her journey was one of misery and suffering, far beyond that of the two Soul Reapers. Her special gift, the ability to see ghosts, would affect her as she rose in rank and plague her immensely all throughout her teen years. Cornelia was taught discipline and instruction by her superiors, and off the field Marianne only worked to toughen the girl up. Strings were pulled to keep Cornelia away from major battlefields, at least until she was a little older, so that she could spend time with her family. This did not, however, mean that Cornelia was due any special treatment because of her status. She was not to be ridiculed for being a child. In fact, Cornelia was quite capable. She couldn't tackle men twice her size and expect to win in a fist fight or a wrestling match, but she was loyal, attentive, and a quick draw. She took her responsibilities seriously, and her responsible was almost always sir, yes sir, to any order unless she found herself with an opinion, which she did so sparingly. Cornelia only spoke out of turn once at the academy, and it was because she had thought of a more efficient way to run a drill that was meant to feel like a real battle out in the fields than her commanding officer. It was ballsy, but even her officer had to give her credit for her brilliance. Cornelia even withstood the shouting when she carefully explained her position. Cornelia even apologized for overstepping her bounds, but in her words, if this were a real fight she wouldn't want to see men killed. Cornelia was also not considered any less expendable than any other soldier, or rather she didn't want to be treated as such. In her own words, Lady Marianne sticks her neck out and no one bats an eyelash, and she was even sent to take out an entire fleet of terrorists with no backup. Cornelia was, however, just a child and didn't understand the vast differences in age, experience, or situations, but her point remained clear, that just because she was a princess did not mean she wanted to be considered any less of a soldier. What Cornelia didn't know was that the Marianne had been reckless on purpose when she went after the terrorists, and that her presence was more of a political choice than one of practicality. Marianne was chosen to go alone because she was efficient in killing, and she was also empress. If the Japanese let her die, it would give Charles a reason to invade. However, success only strengthened the relationship between the two countries, which also worked in Charles's favor as long as Japan openly and willingly supplied the country with sakuradite. Still, Cornelia was to be shielded from dangerous combat that her childish body could not handle. Just because she was expendable did not mean that Charles, Marianne, or even Cornelia's own mother Dolores, wanted Cornelia in a situation where she couldn't at least get her bearings first. Also, Cornelia was still very much a child to an extent, so she did not have the emotional responsibility to handle truly dangerous missions. This fact, however, was hidden from Cornelia, and she would never know until she was old enough to look back on the facts through more mature eyes and be able to thank her parents and idol for doing so. Besides her mother, father, and idol, the person closest to Cornelia was her younger sister Euphemia of 3.5 years of age, her half-brother Lelich, of 4 years and 4 months, and his sister of 1.5 years, Nunnally. Cornelia acted in a fashion towards the three that Ichigo would smile upon. She always looked out for them and did her best to inspire them. Much like Marianne, if anyone dared touch a hair on their heads they would answer to her. Secretly, Cornelia wanted to one day go on a mission alongside her idol to defend her siblings. Lelich, who was old enough to cognitively think at all times, looked up to Cornelia whenever he saw her. Although he was taken with Yuffie, he still revered his older, more mature sister, and saluted her, hoping to one day, at least at this stage in his life, work underneath her. Neither knew as the two siblings stood in the garden with Lelich puffing out his chest and giving Cornelia a tough look and a proud salute that they would one day be at each other's throats. Sis. The young cry from Euphemia caused the two older Brighton-Neon children to look as Yuffie came dashing forward into the garden wearing ruby red shoes, and a poofy, pale orange dress. It was so big she nearly tripped over it trying to get to her sister, but as she stumbled forward, Cornelia, wearing a checkered red coat over her uniform, put her arm out and stopped her sister from tumbling forward. However, Euphemia's childish clumsiness caused her to spin and land on her bum. The whirling sensation caused her to laugh as she landed. When she tripped, Lelich, wearing his favorite red cape, and white shirt and pants with a black vest, noticed a small headdress go flying and land in the grass. He picked it up. It was green with a flower decoration around the sides. The snap had come undone in the back. "Oh, Lelich, let me see that," Cornelia said, asking for the object. Lelich handed it to her. Cornelia snapped the headdress band back in place and placed it over Yuffie's head. "There, perfect," Cornelia noted. Euphemia gave Cornelia a big happy smile. "Cornelia." The third eldest brightened and heard her mother calling her. "Yes, mother," Cornelia called, as she rose to her feet. "Phone call for you," Dolores called. "Coming," Cornelia said. "You two stay right here, okay?" she requested of Lelich and Euphemia. "Yes, Cornelia," they said sweetly. Smiling, Cornelia went inside and answered the phone. "Hello," she said. "Lieutenant, is that you, ma'am?" a male voice asked. "This is Second Lieutenant Cornelia Lee Britannia. Who am I speaking to?" she asked. "My name is Private Garrett Garrison. I was asked by Colonel Hanks to phone you. He says he needs you right away, ma'am," he told her. "I'll be there as soon as I can," Cornelia said. With a gleaming smile she undid the buttons to her jacket, revealing her white uniform with red lapels underneath. Clean white pants accompanied the uniform. She slung her jacket over her arm and went to the front hall closet where she got out her chalk white gloves and maroon mantle. She put them on and dropped her jacket on the floor for the maid to fold for later. "Nonette," she called out. Nonette Enneagram was Cornelia's best friend. She was a tall, lanky woman, 9 years the second princess senior. Nonette had been Cornelia's roommate at the academy except during Cornelia's senior year. Nonette was currently the rank of captain and she had been assigned onto the Lee Britannia Guard unit. Because Cornelia was so young, if she was ever needed by the military out at base, it was Nonette's job to play escort in place of one of the servants. However, much unlike the servants, Nonette wasn't exactly formal with her friend. Her boots clacked along the ground and she walked over to the teenage girl, towering over her. "Yes, Nellie?" she asked, referring to Cornelia by a nickname she had coined for the princess at the academy. "I'm needed at the base." "Escort me," Cornelia said as she walked towards the front door to open it. Nonette nodded and followed Cornelia out the open door as she shut it behind her. Cornelia sat in the front seat with her friend and Nonette drove them out to base. "No imaginary friends today?" Nonette teased. "For the last time, Nonette, they're not imaginary," Cornelia exclaimed. "Shouldn't you take something for that then? They're not hallucinations either. We've been over this." "Oh Nellie, calm down. You need to learn to be more difficult to provoke or else you're not going to get very far as a soldier." "Please," Cornelia folded her arms, "it's just cause you're my friend and we've had this conversation 19 times already. I didn't know you were keeping count." "That's not the point, eyes on the road," Cornelia shouted as Nonette nearly ran through a red light. "Are you trying to get us both killed?" "Nellie, relax. You can't be so serious all the time." "Serious? We could have been killed. First you want me to be more sullen, now you want me relaxed. Make up your mind. You're so flippant." Nonette just tittered to herself and kept driving. It was times like this Cornelia wondered why she was friends with the older woman, but she knew the real reason. Behind the goofy act, Nonette was a model soldier. Cornelia had seen one guy push her around at the academy and Nonette broke his arm, and yet when it was all over Nonette was back to smiling and acting like nothing happened. "What? He wasn't getting the message that I had no interest in him, so I broke his arm. It seemed like a fair trade." Cornelia had feared Nonette's temper ever since. The two arrived at the military base in one piece and both stepped out and entered the base where Colonel Hanks, along with a man neither she nor Nonette had ever met before, were waiting for her. Hanks was an older gentleman with a fuzzy white beard and going bald, but wasn't a day over 40. He carried his professionalism about him. The other man, the one Cornelia had never met, was a man about 20 years her senior. He had combed back hair, the color of tree bark, and a scar running across his face from the top of the right side of his forehead, across his nose, down to his left upper lip. He was 7 feet tall and wore the uniform that, to Cornelia's eyes, voicelessly spoke the rank of general. He also looked like he had spent one too many days in the sun. Lieutenant Britannia, Captain Annie Graham, this is General Andreas Darleton, Hanks introduced them. So this is the young woman you were telling me about, Darleton said, placing his thumb and index finger under his chin. He dropped his hands at his sides. You're an ambitious young lady to want to be in the military at your age. How old are you? Sir. Cornelia saluted. This second lieutenant is 14 years of age, General Darleton, sir. Cornelia thrust her arm forward and down at her side. Darleton laughed heartedly. Just like you said, Hanks, enthusiastic little one she is. She's Dolores' eldest. That she is. Hanks responded. And who's this? Darleton looked at Nonet. The blonde saluted immediately. Captain Nonet Annie Graham of 9th Company, sir, serving in the 9th Regiment of the 9th Division, sir. I'm stationed along with the rest of the regiment as Dolores Lee Britannia's personal guard, sir. I'm also a close personal friend of the lieutenant's. I see, so you look out for the lieutenant. Nonet dropped her hand and shrugged with a smile, in a sense. Nellie's capable of handling herself most of the time. Yes, speaking of which, Cornelia saluted again. How may I be of service today, sir? Both of you come here. As long as you're here, Captain, you might as well listen in, Darleton beckoned. Because she wasn't that tall, Cornelia stepped onto the stool in front of her and looked over the map on the table. It seemed to be the blueprints to some form of office. A few days ago down south by the Gulf, a couple of terrorists rounded up some of our boys and did a hostile takeover of this office. They've boarded themselves up inside a room that's under heavy lock and key. Even our demolition experts can't get in, and other methods could cause the foundation to collapse. Why is that a problem? Nonet asked, wondering if perhaps they couldn't just collapse the building and let the terrorists be buried within it. It's an embassy of one of the EU ambassadors. Thankfully it was mostly unoccupied when the terrorists attacked, but there are still hostages to consider. We let that building collapse and we risk an international incident. The terrorists aren't EU affiliated? Are they Chinese? Cornelia asked. We don't know. What we do know is that we need your help, Lieutenant. Darleton pointed to a spot on the blueprints. The area might be well defended, but you're small enough to get in through the ventilation shaft. The spaces between the slits are wide enough for a bullet to get through. If you're quick, you might be able to disarm or even kill the terrorists. You handled firearms before? He asked Cornelia. Just the .38 Magnum I was trained with, sir, Cornelia responded. The Magnum was the only handgun she could fire at such a young age without feeling the kickback too badly. I tried a .45 Colt once, but... No worries, we'll get you a few extra cartridges and a bulletproof vest. Britannia needs its second princess after all, Darleton said. Follow me and we'll take the helicopter. Yes, sir. Cornelia saluted. I'm going to. Someone needs to escort Nellie to the ventilation area, might as well be me. It's my duty to ensure her safety after all. Once again, Cornelia saw the real Nonet shining through. The moment push came to shove, Nonet become serious and laser-focused, and it was something Cornelia admired in her friend. By all means, Darleton said. If Nonet can come, why should I not bring my entire platoon? Cornelia asked. We need to be discreet, Darleton answered her. Too many soldiers and the hostages might be shot. I have a few men down there under a different officer there just to make sure the terrorists don't flee the scene. If it's just you and Nonet, two of our finest officers, I think we'll be okay. If you need backup, you only need to call for it. Understood. Cornelia saluted, and soon she and Nonet were the highest they'd ever been as they flew over to the building by helicopter. Say, General? Cornelia asked to Darleton, having another inquiry. Yes, Lieutenant. Why isn't the EU handling this? It's their embassy. They are sending their own troops, but they are crossing the seas and would take longer to arrive than we would. His Majesty is hoping that if the EU were to be grateful for Britannia's unnecessary interference that it would improve standings with the countries. Politics as usual, I see, Nonet sighed. You get used to it when you've been on the force as long as I have, Darlton responded. Cornelia didn't care much about politics. She left that kind of thing to Schneeisel. Cornelia focused her mind more on battlefield strategies than political subterfuge. Schneeisel would, of course, argue that they were mostly the same thing. Lelich was up and coming to realize the same, but Schneeisel's life experience showed the difference between him and Lelich. At least that was the only explanation Cornelia could come up with when Lelich always beat Clovis in chess, was about 50-50ths with her, but could never defeat Schneeisel. She suspected one day Lelich might best Schneeisel and her month-younger brother would never see it coming. But such daydreams were for another time. As Nonet and Darlton reached their destination, Cornelia and Nonet descended by rope and harness rather than parachute as the helicopter made its safe descent. The soldiers outside the embassy, making sure the terrorists had no means of escape, saluted to both Cornelia and Nonet as they dropped to the ground. The front doors had been welded shut upon examination by the two women. Any ideas? Cornelia asked her superior. Nonet simply ran her finger down the welding line and stopped at a certain point. Stand back, Nellie, she urged. Cornelia stood behind Nonet as she aimed her pistol at the proper spot and then fired. There was a weak spot in the welding and the bullet tore right through. Good. With me, Nellie, we're going to break it down. Got it. 1, 2, 3. Cornelia and Nonet kicked the doors as hard as they could and the metal came right off the hinges. They were in. Upon entry, Cornelia went over to a low-rising table in the lobby where she checked her gun to make sure it was loaded and then properly holstered the 3 extra cartridges of ammunition. Nonet did the same, only she took the nearest jutting out wall for cover. Okay, Cornelia took a deep breath, here we go. Having memorized the layout on the flight over, Cornelia and Nonet nodded to each other and ran down to the staircase where 2 terrorists stood in front of the door. Upon sight they began shooting at Cornelia and Nonet, who had to take cover and prepare to fight back. Cowards, one of the terrorists mused, that's the Britonians for you, they bark big, but can't bite. As Cornelia had stated earlier, she didn't fall for the taunt. She looked to Nonet, who signaled to her as she readied her shotgun. The plan was for Cornelia to duck and weave and draw fire while Nonet took aim and tagged the soldiers with her more powerful gun. If Cornelia could get close, she had every right to open fire though. Go, go, Nonet whispered, and the plan took action. Cornelia ran out into the open to the hallway, whereupon the soldiers began firing upon her, most of the shots missing or impacting on Cornelia's vest. The closest a bullet came to hitting her skin was one that flew past her ear, almost taking some of it with her, but still completely missing. Quickly, but cautiously so as not to shoot Cornelia, Nonet took aim with her weapon and fired at one of the soldiers, killing him instantly as she tagged him right in the head. Distracted momentarily by the death of his partner, the other terrorist stopped firing and Cornelia tagged him in the chest 3 times, which was enough to kill him. Nonet then raced up to her partner. Where did these guys learn to aim? What did they do? Watch Galactic Conquest too many times and take lessons from the wrong side. Rebels aren't as well trained as soldiers, Cornelia said. Just because you put a gun in your hand doesn't mean you know how to use it or can hit anything with it. Well said, Nellie. Cornelia took a look at the lock and chains barring the door and was going to shoot it off when Nonet stepped up. No, let me, she said, save your ammunition for the main objective. Cornelia nodded in agreement. With the lock shot off, Nonet and Cornelia ran up the stairs towards the 4th floor, but when they hit the landing of the 2nd, a gunshot rang out towards them. Both women ducked for cover underneath the staircase. Cornelia looked up. From her advantageous position she could see her targets, but they couldn't see her or Nonet. Die Imperial dogs! The shout came from above. Can you get them from here? Cornelia asked Nonet. Not sure. I may need you to use some of your ammo. Don't worry, I'll give you mine when we reach the ventilation shaft so you have some extra. I've still got this baby after all, Nonet said, clocking her shotgun. Cornelia loaded her pistol up to maximum capacity and darted from her hiding spot and began firing shots up towards the 4th floor. She was missing terribly, but it was enough to draw fire on her, while Nonette focused her shot. "Damn it, I wish I had a sniper rifle," the older woman bemused, as the much bulkier weapon would have better accuracy. Still, all she needed was a steady shot, and with the railway to lean the gun on, she managed to not waste a single shot and tagged both terrorists in the shoulder. Cornelia managed to run up and kill one guy while the other backed away from her towards the door. "You're just a kid," he shouted, only to smirk. "This ain't no game, you know, sweetheart." "Who's playing?" Cornelia said, taking aim. "Aren't you a little young to be a soldier?" The terrorist grinned at her. With a dull expression, Cornelia fired her gun into his head. The bullet impacted on the back of the door. Yes, I am, but I don't care," Cornelia said as she held the smoking firearm. "Good work, Nellie," Nonette said as she reached the top of the stairwell. Cornelia nodded in acknowledgement to her superior's praise. Not wanting to touch the corpse in front of her, she kicked it with the side of her boot and then pushed the door open. The ventilation shaft was just off to her and Nonette's left, but they could hear feet clomping their way. Nonette ran over to the corpses and picked up one of their weapons, a semi-automatic rifle. "I got this, Nellie, focus on the mission. There are way too many for you to take by yourself," Cornelia told her. "Like we established earlier, these bozos can't aim worth shit, now do what we came here to do." Cornelia nodded as Nonette blocked her from view and took out the screwdriver she had been given in order to open the ventilation shaft. She stepped inside. Darlton was right, only she was small enough to crawl through this thing. Anyone else would have been too wide and Nonette was way too tall. However, crawling along the shaft on her stomach was chafing her breasts that had slowly been growing in since last year. If they were any bigger, Cornelia would have had her own reason to be too big for the shaft. From the vents up along the ceiling, Cornelia could see Nonette taking grazing shots and gunning down the soldiers heading her way. Cornelia thought to help out by slipping her pistol in between the slits of the vent, but it would give away her position. "Nonette's a big girl, she can handle herself. I have a mission to take care of." Cornelia continued to squirm along the vent shaft until she was in a spot of it that was so wide you'd think it was another floor and not the vents, but Cornelia was only just short enough to have plenty of room in the boxy area above the room where her targets sat. She readied her pistol, including reloading, and took careful observance of the situation. The hostages were all tied up together. From the looks of the business suits, they weren't even people of any great importance, just run-of-the-mill embassy staff, some of them bright and neon. There were 5 men in the room, 2 in front of the door and 1 ready to shoot the hostages if Nonette suddenly smashed the door in and made an advance. The other 2 men were playing cards in the other corner of the room, which was just a standard office with a desk, a few plants and some bookcases. The men at the door had Uzis. Cornelia would be riddled in the back of the head if she just dropped down and didn't make her shots count. However, the hostages were of more concern. If she failed to save the hostages, Darlton would say Cornelia tried her best and that at least the embassy had been taken back, but that was not the kind of soldier Cornelia had signed up to be. She was the kind of person that saved everyone. She never believed there wasn't a solution where not everyone could be saved. This was yet another reason she was still considered a child. This is going to be difficult, Cornelia thought to herself. I don't have the best of accuracy with just a pistol. If I could handle bigger firearms, this wouldn't be as much of a hassle. She pressed her weapon in the slit between the vents. Then again, any bigger a barrel and I wouldn't be able to fire without my bullet scraping against the vent. As Cornelia's body tensed, she suddenly felt a surge run through her. It felt like an adrenaline rush, what with the sweat dripping down her forehead and soaking through her clothes, but there was something about it that felt odd. Cornelia's eyes strained themselves and she felt like she was watching the world in slow motion. This sensation, it feels so odd, supernatural. It's like, I can see the muscle movement of my targets. I feel strong. I feel confident. Cornelia's eyes tightened. I can do this. Cornelia brought her elbow down on the vent shaft and began to drop towards the floor. She held out her pistol and tagged the gunman aiming at the hostages and tagged him right in head. She had done it so cleanly and without warning that the terrorists with the assault rifles were only now aiming their weapons to shoot her, and Cornelia had enough adrenaline in her to move in time to get behind her dead enemy and use him as shield while she kicked the table over with the back of her heel to protect the hostages before taking aim at the other two terrorists across the room with her pistol with pinpoint accuracy. Her corpse shield was running out of durability, so she jumped behind the table, also running low on durability, but with a steel bottom it would last longer than the fleshy terrorist, and Cornelia's vest would protect her from bullets as long as she kept her head down. Quickly she untied the hostages with a box cutter that had slid off the table when she kicked it over. "Stay down!" Cornelia shouted over the gunfire. She then drew fire by running over to one of the bookshelves and wedging in between it. The shelf was hollow in the back and the books didn't reach the top of the shelves, so as the terrorists began firing over Cornelia's head, not used to fighting such a short target, Cornelia aimed her gun and tagged them both as she stealthy took pot shots where they couldn't see the shots coming from and got one of them in the throat and the other one in the mouth. The bullet shattered his teeth and slammed against the back of his throat, not making it all the way through, but it slammed into his uvula causing him to vomit, and with his friend dead Cornelia took the opportunity to grab a book, throw it at the terrorist, smacking him in the head, and while he was recoiling took her kill shot. The adrenaline began to leave Cornelia as she stood there panting in a room full of dead bodies and so much blood on the floor that a rat could swim in the puddles. Cornelia put her gun away and went over to the door to unlock it. "Stay here," she called to the hostages. She had to check on Nonet. She ran down the hall and aimed her gun to take fire, but the only thing in the open hallway was her friend slumped against the radiator. She was grazed, but the tall captain could handle worse. "Nonet." Cornelia ran to check on her and crouched down at her friend's side. She had taken a glancing shot to her shoulder and one to the side of her arm, and there were several bullets impacted against her vest. "I'm fine, Nellie, just a bit winded. When nothing came after me after a little while, I felt like taking a short breather. You want me to help you up? You might just aggravate my wounds from the pulling." "I got this," Nonet said and inched her back up the radiator in order to get to her feet. "The hostages okay?" Cornelia nodded her head. "Everything's clear," she pointed behind her. "That's good. I'll go get the general. You stay with the hostages," Nonet told her. "Good thinking. You should get patched up while you're outside," Cornelia suggested. "Yeah," Nonet agreed. As the success of rescuing the hostages and saving the embassy was Cornelia's first real mission other than just running drills and wearing the uniform, she was commended for her bravery and skill, especially considering the odds and the chances of succeeding with the hostages alive and intact. Their witness accounts helped prove that Cornelia wasn't bullshitting the high-risk and high-reward actions she took to do what she did. It was reckless, sure. Cornelia even felt that if she hadn't had that rush going through her, she would have protected herself first by taking out the assault rifleman. If she was lucky, the hostage shooter might have turned his attention to her, or he could have taken out, at best, one of the 5 tied-up hostages. Still, for facing down impossible odds, and with a recommendation from Nonet, Cornelia was promoted to first lieutenant. Her platoon was also doubled in size, so she now had 52 enlisted soldiers under her command. Cornelia and Nonet stood in the corner talking to each other during the celebration, which was just an excuse for the nobles to mingle and Cornelia's mom to be seen in a better light while she schmoozed with them. "You get promoted to first lieutenant for being an idiot while I wind up with 2 wounds and a vest full of lead." "Oh, bite me," Cornelia said with a playful smile, pinching Nonet's arm. "That can be arranged," Nonet said, almost flirting. Cornelia coughed hard. "Careful. You're not supposed to choke on the punch. It's not alcoholic. You two sound like you're enjoying yourselves. Not ones for socialization, I take it." Cornelia recognized the charming, suave voice from off to her left. She turned to see the second prince, and Cornelia's closest in age sibling, Schneeisel, standing by with a glass of punch and dressed rather sharply in a blue suit, black tie, and white dress shirt. "Schneeisel? I didn't know you were here. Your mother invited my mother and I was asked to come along. How are you, Cornelia? I don't see you often enough." "No, that's certainly true. I guess I'm not important enough to be noticed. If it wasn't for me, Nellie wouldn't have made it through her first year," Nonet teased. "Ah, dearest Captain Enneagram, how could I not notice you? Because you have piss poor aim, Nonet retorted. Schneeisel laughed. So, First Lieutenant after one mission? You certainly are following in Empress Marianne's footsteps. Cornelia beamed at hearing that. Don't make it go to her head, Schneeisel. Next thing you know, Nellie will try convincing me to take on the EU, just the two of us. Please, I'm not that. Cornelia suddenly felt woozy and pale. Oh my head, she groaned. Cornelia. Nellie, are you all right? Nonet asked. I don't feel so good, Cornelia swayed. It's just normal punch though. Nonet eyed her drink. Best escort to the lavatory anyway. I'll wait here. Nonet nodded and took Cornelia to the bathroom, whereupon Cornelia bent over the toilet bowl and heaved into it, and she rested her head against the toilet seat. Now that things were settling down, Cornelia's body was catching up with her mind and emotions, and it was rejecting the sight of all the blood and all the death. Cornelia was a hardened soldier, but that mission was the first time she had killed people. She was a trained soldier, she had seen nothing wrong with it, but her somewhere deep inside the scent of blood now still invaded her nostrils, and she was feeling the effects. It only gets easier with time, Nonet called to Cornelia from inside. Cornelia tilted her head towards the door. I already went through what you're going through. A lot of soldiers do if they haven't been dragged through the muck and mud before enrolling in the academy or joining the army right out. You did nothing wrong. The men you killed were our enemies. Yes, this is the path I've chosen. Don't stray from it, okay? Nonet turned from having her back to the door to pressing her hand and cheek against it. Remember that Miss Marianne might have been through this too. Cornelia smiled. Whenever she was compared to Marianne, it always made her feel good. You let me know when you're ready to come out. I'm right here, Nonet said, and went back to having her back to the door. Cornelia eventually did return to the party, and when she got in the limo to go home, she stared at the window, Yuffie snoozing against her, staring at the moon and thinking about the road ahead of her. I will not let this deter me. I made a commitment. I am a soldier. This is path that I have chosen. I will not leave it. July. It was rather hot, and Cornelia was in her family's garden sipping lemonade and lounging in a lawn chair in a maroon bathing suit and wearing a digital watch. She also was having her privates scuttling about the house, performing manual labor like washing the family cars, grooming the horses, and things that the scant few servants Cornelia's mother had would have taken a long time to take care of on their own, not to mention Dolores didn't pay her servants enough to rake the gutters and remove junk from the attic. Marianne was over for the day to chat with the only noblewoman who would give her the time of day, since many of Charles's other wives resented Marianne for her commoner birth. Dolores, however, believed in ability before status. She said that if Charles's had been all talk, she would never have been taken in by him. And she commended Marianne for actually having the ability to do something. Cornelia thought her mother might actually be somewhat jealous of Marianne, but at least her jealousy was not spiteful or hateful if it was there, more of the friendly, occasional sighing kind. Cornelia got the same belief system from her mother about ability before status, but she hadn't been aware of her idol's commoner birth for most of her life. Cornelia first became entranced with Marianne when the woman was hired as her babysitter. Marianne is only 10 years older than Cornelia after all. Well, okay, babysitter wasn't exactly the proper term. Marianne, like Cornelia, was also a military prodigy, having joined it at a young age, and during her term was on Cornelia's house guard, much like Nonet was now. What inspired Cornelia to become like Marianne was when the woman, a teenager at the time, was escorting Cornelia through town only for Marianne to tell Cornelia to stay where she was and flew out at a man that had just snatched a woman's purse. It was an action best left to the city police, to be sure, but Marianne wasn't one to watch the world suffer. She did go a little far though and broke the man's arm, but it was the action and the motivation behind it that left an impression on the young princess and made Cornelia want to idolize Marianne. She even joined the academy the same age as her idol, 9. Marianne's visit though was just an excuse to let Lelich come and see Cornelia and Yuffie. Yuffie was sleeping though, so Lelich was spending time with Cornelia out in the garden. He was interrogating his older sister about what she was doing and didn't exactly approve of her actions. Don't you think you're abusing your position a little? Lelich asked. Cornelia stopped drinking her lemonade, threw her straw mid-sip and put it down on the small glass table next to her. She lowered her sunglasses to look at Lelich. That might be what it looks like, but I'm doing it to teach them a lesson. What lesson? Lelich snapped. Cornelia turned back onto her back and went back to sunbathing. A lesson that they might not learn if they're too dull-witted. Lieutenant. Ah, right on schedule, Cornelia mused to herself. Stand next to chair and watch Lelich. You'll learn an important life lesson if you intend on following in my shoes. Cornelia stood up and folded her arms as she watched more than half her men marching towards her, angry. Something I can help you boys with. We're sick and tired of all this manual labor. I think I speak for all of us when I say this is beneath us. You do realize you're talking to a superior officer. Cornelia lowered her shades. You're also a brat that's abusing her power to make us do servant work. Give us one reason not to report you to your precious Lady Marianne. Told you, Lelich quipped only for Cornelia to put a hand down by his face to signal to keep his mouth shut. She then put her sunglasses down on the table, held her hands up by her right shoulder and then started clapping. She then looked at her watch. 1 hour, 14 minutes. About bloody time. Her officers were confused. Listen up. Cornelia shouted. The work you have been doing for me was a roundabout test and all of you standing here have passed with flying colors. Test. The speaking soldier was both confused and insulted that Cornelia could be passing her manual labor off as a test. Yes, a test, Cornelia said and walked up the stone steps behind her to the marble statue of Benjamin Franklin in the center, surrounded by 3 other sets of steps on the other 3 sides. I gave you all manual labor so that you would, as you all here have done, call me out on it. It takes guts to stand up to your commanding officer. We live in the kind of world where corruption lurks in every corner. There's no telling if it's possible that corruption exists within the army and military itself. If you see corruption, do not be afraid to call it out. This was my way of teaching you that lesson. However, let me be clear that this will be the only time you should feel led astray. As long as you serve under me, I will use your services to the best of my tactical knowledge. You serve under a military prodigy and a princess of Britannia, but I am a lieutenant of the Imperial Army before I am either of those things. Am I understood? Ma'am, yes ma'am. The soldiers saluted in unison. Good, now I want you to divide amongst yourselves who's going to help with guarding the inside of the house. I want a soldier at every guard. I want half of what is left to you roam the streets and the rest of you can go about your business as you see fit. Those are your assignments for today. Tomorrow you will remain at base unless you are otherwise called for. Is that understood? Ma'am, yes ma'am. I don't hear conviction. Am I understood? Ma'am, yes ma'am. Good, Cornelia folded her arms, see to it. The soldiers dispersed. Cornelia then went back to her lawn chair and lemonade. I told you I knew what I was doing. I can't believe they could take you seriously while you're in a bathing suit. Lelich wasn't implying anything dirty since he was only 4. But he found it a little humorous of Cornelia delivering this magnificent speech while wearing almost nothing. They're professionals. It's what they do. Cornelia sipped her lemonade. I think I'll finish this and then go on patrol, see if there's anything worth doing. Shouldn't you leave that kind of thing to the police? They're busy enough with their cases and red tape. Soldiers don't think, they just do. All men are not created equal. We answer only to our superiors. Police answer to the law. I hate that saying. Still, why would you go out there? Don't you trust your soldiers to do their jobs and report back to you? Cornelia finished her lemonade and stood up. Leaders must always be willing to take action. If a general is not there fighting beside his troops, or any leader alongside his or her men and women, how can the soldiers expect to follow? You spout some of the weirdest things to say. But also some of the wisest. I've got a whole book in the library of wise words of wisdom if you want to read it. You're a bright kid, you could probably read it and impress Lady Marianne with how your brain is coming along. Humph. Lelich said and watched his sister walk away and into the house. Cornelia changed into her uniform and patted herself down to make sure she had everything. She then walked out the door and admired the sunshine before she began to take some steps out the door and out into the marketplace and city streets. End of chapter 138. Chapter 139, Cornelia's Random Encounter. Third-person POV. September 2004. Cornelia walked to the family stables where the Brighton kept their horses. Most Brighton nobles kept horses for the sake of playing polo, others trained them for the annual races. Cornelia herself had one for personal transportation, since she was too young to drive and found that she disliked patrols out on foot. She hadn't asked to be treated with a horse, but she welcomed it nonetheless. Besides being easier on her legs, it helped her compensate for her smaller frame in comparison to more burly and manly soldiers under her command. The horse she was riding, imported and tamed from overseas, had a shiny black coat. She had owned the equine for a year now, and had taken several months to learn how to ride. Her steed was resistant at first to Cornelia riding atop it, but Cornelia showed the animal who was in control. It was an unusual experience, but Cornelia felt it helped compensate for her short stature, though she was due for a growth spurt soon. The second princess trotted out at a steady pace and wandered into the marketplace. Besides air-conditioned indoor markets and restaurants, there were still plenty of old-fashioned fruit stands, outdoor merchants and salespeople out in the upper-class markets in Pendragon. In a more industrial province like New Yorkshire, however, things were vastly different, with high-rising buildings and small indoor stacked buildings rising to 14 stories on average. Cornelia sat atop her steed and patrolled calmly through the marketplace. Seeing as she was an upper-class noble and her uniform made her stand out amongst the crowd, many lower-class nobles and wealthy citizens parted the way to give Cornelia and her mount some room. Cornelia looked all around the markets, seeing the clean and quiet environment. With the upper markets secure, Cornelia made her way to the lower markets where the lower middle class resided. These were the people constantly paying taxes and sometimes parting with prized possessions just to get by. Cornelia did not frown upon them, unlike some of her siblings and family members, for being less fortunate. After all, her idol Marianne had once belonged to these people, so Cornelia often took it upon herself to help out whenever she patrolled the area. However, upon nearing the lower markets, she heard shouting and saw an explosion from far off. Kicking her legs, her horse sprinted towards the markets. Cornelia geared at a halt as she neared, and saw the townspeople in disorganized frenzy, running in various directions because the local Pizza Hut had caught fire, and was nothing but a smoldering crater. Cornelia's horse whinnied as it geared up onto its hind legs upon seeing the blaze, but Cornelia got it under control and had it trot in a circle. "Easy, Luna," she said, calling the horse by its name. Luna snorted and Cornelia looked upon the carnage, looking for an opening before snapping the reins and directing Luna into the chaos before pulling out her gun, and firing a shot into the air. Everyone heard the gun go off and instantly turned in the direction of the shot to look at Cornelia. "Calm down. Can anyone tell me what happened here?" Before, however, anybody could do as much as give Cornelia an answer, she heard a loud roar that penetrated her ears, not unlike the cries of the damned in a horror movie. And yet, none of the townspeople reacted to it, not even Luna. "I'm too young to be hearing things." Cornelia tried to shrug it off, when, suddenly, a weird monster came crashing through the building to Cornelia's right. It was big, black, built like a gorilla and had a white head resembling the skull of the primate. It certainly did not sound like one, though. The creature landed upon a few townspeople, who immediately scattered and ran off in panic. On instinct, Cornelia opened fire on the bizarre creature, which didn't seem to affect it in the slightest. Luna was acting too calm for the situation, which bothered Cornelia greatly. Hearing the shots, the monster turned its attention towards her, and swung out its mighty arm at Cornelia. The back of the creature's fist slammed into her chest, and knocked her clear off her mount. Luna freaked out and ran away as Cornelia landed painfully on her left elbow. The creature bore down upon her with a roar. Just now, it occurred to Cornelia that she had seen a creature like this before, though she simply could not recall where that was. Hado 33, Sakasui. A blast of bright blue energy hit the creature in the back of the head and it turned its attention away from Cornelia to fight the attacker. Cornelia's ears were overrun with the screaming of the civilians and she was too low down at an angle to see what had attacked the creature in front of her. As the creature turned its attention to its new target, though, Cornelia pulled out her radio and called HQ. "This is First Lieutenant Cornelia Lee Britannia. We have a situation down at the lower quarter marketplace." Cornelia paused to wonder how she would address the situation. Something told her that mentioning the gigantic creature would be ill-advised. She had the distinct feeling this had something to do with her odd ability to see ghosts. There is a panic due to an unknown assailant, of which I myself am heading to investigate. Please send backup to secure the area and calm the civilians. Other than that, my horse bolted from me. I request if there are any available soldiers not doing anything of dire importance to keep a lookout for her. Over and out. Cornelia picked herself up and flexed her arm a few times to make sure her elbow was fine. It wasn't broken, just a little banged. Cornelia blessed her good fortune on her military training, loaded her gun to full ammunition and then took off in the direction of where she had watched the monster run towards. She ran down the street and followed the creature as it charged down the street before heading away from the civilized area hot in pursuit of whatever it was chasing. Cornelia, even with her military-trained stamina and high running speed, could barely keep up the pursuit. She soon found herself in the middle of one of the many nature reserves that separated the different communities within Pendragon. It gave the opportunities for civilians to camp and for soldiers to train. Cornelia, however, was now here to chase down some form of bizarre creature. Upon entering the reserve, she clicked her gun so she could fire it at a moment's notice and looked around, having lost sight of her attacker long ago. "Come on out, you ugly bastard," Cornelia murmured, one hand over the hammer and the other firmly gripping the handle and trigger. She heard a movement and opened fire at another white-headed creature that charged at her. This one, however, was much smaller, being about half Cornelia's size. It reminded her of the weird, midget creatures with the pussy skin and large ears in the computer game many of the male academy students were fond of playing. She recalled them calling these creatures goblins. Cornelia opened fire on the creature, grazing it a few times. The weird creature carried a small spear with it and moved incredibly quickly. Cornelia, however, was a trained soldier, and while a normal human would have been overwhelmed, even Nonet would have been able to keep up with the small creature. As it neared Cornelia with its spear and attacked, Cornelia grabbed the shaft of the weapon and broke it with her hand, like it was made of wood. She then aimed at the creature's head and shot it in the face. Being hit like that, the creature disintegrated. Well, that was easy enough. I wonder what happened to the bigger monster though? Cornelia thought to herself, putting her gun away. As if on cue, a tree suddenly fell towards Cornelia's path. She reacted quickly enough to dodge, as the big monster from before appeared, now bleeding from several lacerative wounds on its abdomen and chest. It also had, as Cornelia just now noticed, a hole in its chest the size of a watermelon. It roared as blood leaked from its wounds, charged at Cornelia and then swiped at her. Cornelia was surprised how much faster it was compared to the weakling she had dispatched earlier. She barely had time to duck and roll backwards, before pulling her gun back out and opening fire. Her shots, however, barely did anything, and some even bounced off the creature's skin. "Damn it, what the hell is that thing?" Cornelia lamented, as she made zero progress. "Why can't I harm it?" With a fearsome roar, the beast pulled its arm back and then fiercely punched Cornelia in her torso, sending her flying into a tree. Cornelia's gun went flying out of her hands from the impact. She scrambled for it, only for the big ape creature to grab a clump of dirt and chuck it at her, sending Cornelia spiraling along the ground as she got slammed in the side. Cornelia was incredibly battered and did not have much strength to stand on as she got to her feet, breathing heavily with her legs shaking. She was hunched over too. Cornelia prepared for the worst as the creature began to charge forward to ram her, but there was another shout similar in pitch to the one she had heard earlier. "Hado 32, Okazan." In the next instant, a girl with light, blonde hair going down a little past her shoulders, with a height even shorter than Cornelia, garbed in all black, and wearing a red hairband, appeared in front of the second princess as she blasted the creature in the chest with a flash of yellow energy. There was a blade with a pink handle sheathed behind the girl's back in a pink scabbard. It was too big to be a wakizashi, but too small to be a full-length katana. There was a tiny chain attached to the pommel with a green gem attached to the end of the chain. "Who is this?" Cornelia wondered, only for her head to throb, and she clutched it in pain, feeling like she saw someone in this uniform before, but with red hair tied in a spiked ponytail along with an eye patch and a prosthetic hand. "We are your opponent. Leave the other out of this," the young blonde declared, throwing her right arm out at her side. "We? Is there more than one of them?" The hollow roared at the blonde girl, who remained as unfettered as Cornelia. "We are not intimidated by your attempts to terrify us." The girl gripped her weapon with her right hand. "A sword? I was using a gun and it was having no effect. Does she think a sword is going to be any more effective?" Cornelia thought to herself, only to remember the slash wounds on the creature's body. "Wait, did she do that? She's even younger than me." The girl grabbed her sword from behind her back and whipped it out. Cornelia had never seen finer craftsmanship than that of this blade, but only saw the blade for a moment before the girl disappeared in an instant. Cornelia had only to see the girl crouch momentarily before she was all the way over by the big creature, attacking its leg with her sword and inflicting a serious injury, bringing the big brute to its knee. The creature pounded the ground in an attempt to smash the small blonde into the earth, but she backed away very agilely and turned her body as she crossed her non-sword arm over her shoulder. "Be bound here for eternity, hunger stilled, rage smothered, desire dampened, pride crushed. In the name of Mother Earth, so let it be. Hado 25, Shizen no Fukushu." Nature's revenge. Spinning 360 degrees, the young girl slammed her free hand into the earth. Instantly, a gigantic thorny spike that appeared to be made out of gnarled roots and twigs shot up out of the ground at an angle in front of the creature, towards the primate creature, and smashed through the creature's abdomen. With a quick sprint, the girl ran towards the spiky thorn still lodged in her opponent and then pushed off the inclined spike, before launching herself into the air and cutting the creature down the center of its face, and the creature disintegrated. The girl then dropped to the ground and sheathed her sword. Cornelia's head throbbed again and she crouched onto one knee. A memory played back in her mind. She remembered an experience from when she was 10. It was a memory that, unbeknownst to her, was supposed to have been overwritten. It played in flashes, unclear. A creature similar to the one she had just fought against had broken into her home and attacked her, Lelich and Yuffie, when the latter two were infants. She remembered the woman in black, with red hair, an eye patch and a fake hand, but the memory was scattered. She couldn't see it in one fluid recollection. The blonde girl approached Cornelia, looking at her. She had emerald green eyes like the gem on the pommel of her sword. "Can you see us?" the girl asked, waving her hand in front of Cornelia's face. "What does she mean, us? She's only one person here besides me." Cornelia was jarred when the blonde suddenly grabbed her arm. She jerked her hand free. The blonde was now looking at her hand. "Yes, you do appear to have sufficient spiritual power." "Spiritual power? What does she mean by that?" Cornelia asked, only for her vision to wane momentarily. "Why is my head so light?" she staggered. "Is it because I'm exhausted?" Her vision waned again. This time it was for a few seconds. "Is it because of that memory?" She clutched her head and squinted. "Ugh. It hurts. I'm going to pass out." Cornelia collapsed upon the ground. Hey. Are you okay? Miss. The girl shook her. When Cornelia finally came to, she was lying on her back in the hospital wing of the nearest military base. "Captain. She's waking up." Cornelia felt groggy as she opened her eyes and looked around to see a few of her soldiers and a nurse standing around her bedside. Just as she opened her eyes, she also noticed Nonette, who just came into the room. "Nellie." She rushed to her bedside. "Oh my gosh. Are you okay? Speak to me, Nellie." "No need to shout, I can hear you just fine." Cornelia smiled. "There's no reason to be worried, Nonette." Nonette put a hand on her chest and breathed a sigh of relief. She turned to the other soldiers. "You are dismissed. Leave us." "Yes, Captain," one soldier said as the rest saluted and they all exited. "You gave us quite a scare, Nellie. Are you sure you're okay?" Nonette asked. "Yes, I think I just collapsed from exhaustion." Nonette nodded. "Yes, that's what we think too. All your readings seem normal, but the Major wants you to lie back and get some rest for a few more hours to make sure." "How long have I been out for?" 5 weeks. Nonette said casually. Cornelia was about to panic and then saw the giddy look on Nonette's face and then lay back with a dull glance. "Oh, you're full of shit." Nonette laughed and wiped a tear from her eye. Sorry. Couldn't resist the temptation there. Nonet took a deep breath. Really though, you've only been out for an hour, since we found you about an hour and a half ago, which was about 25 minutes after you made that call to HQ. Now it was Cornelia's turn to be relieved. That's good. She was surprised when Nonet suddenly hugged her around the shoulders, nuzzling her head next to Cornelia's. I'm glad we didn't lose you, Nellie, Nonet said in a soft, tender voice. Cornelia put her arms around her best friend. It's okay, I'm okay Nonet. I'm fine. Elsewhere in Pendragon. The blonde Soul Reaper that had met with Cornelia earlier that day had sent in her report on the incident about a half an hour ago. She was currently sitting on the roof of a flower shop until another holo showed up or a plus wandered into her field of vision. Before either could happen though, her soul pager went off. It was an incoming call from a number not saved on the Soul Reaper's contact list, but she answered it anyway. We answer, she said. Is this Kazumioji Rurakiyo? A young, but deep voice answered. This is we, the girl answered. Who are we speaking to? This is Captain of Squad 10, Lamperouge Lelich. The girl gasped and sprung to her feet immediately. See Captain Lamperouge, sir. We are sorry. We did not recognize your voice over the phone. Rurakiyo had not forgotten what Lelich had done for her family years ago. Thanks to him, and Zero, it was not public knowledge that Lelich and Zero were one and the same. Rurakiyo's father still lived and threats to her family had been neutralized. Lelich was not Rurakiyo's captain, however, that was Byakuya's role. It's alright. It has been a while after all. How may we be of service, Lamperouge Teiko? Rurakiyo asked. Your captain forwarded your report to me about the battle today. He said that you had run in with a civilian that other people who came to recover her unconscious body called Lieutenant Lee Britannia. That is correct. There was a pause on the other line. Teiko. Rurakiyo, are you absolutely certain this woman has spiritual power? We are certain. There was another pause. Very well, listen to me very carefully. I want you to observe this woman from a distance until we send a member of the 2nd Division to take care of that job in your place. Please try and avoid direct contact with this woman unless absolutely necessary. If you cannot, do not be afraid of her. She is not a threat to you or to the Soul Society. If it is unavoidable, you can explain to her what she had gotten herself into, the same way the Sanbantai Fukotaiko Shibarukia explained our society to Kurosaki Ichigo. Do not do this though unless there is no way to avoid it or her life would be endangered otherwise. And whatever you do though, do not mention me to her by name at all costs. There is more going on here than you can even begin to understand. Do I make myself clear? Crystal, sir. We will not let you down. Rurakiyo exclaimed. Thank you, Rurakiyo. I'm counting on you. You can count on us, Lamperouge Teiko. The debt we owe you has yet to be repaid. As I have said, you owe me nothing, but thank you for your reassurance. Lelich then hung up on Rurakiyo. Soul Society. 10th Division, Lelich's office. Lelich put his phone down on the receiver and massaged his temples. What a pain. He had not expected this development, not at all. However, reality wasn't unraveling even by a single particle, which meant that this was something he simply failed to recognize when he was alive. But how could he have missed something so glaring? True, he himself did not have spiritual power while alive, but why did Cornelia? Where did it come from? Was it genetic? And if it was, who else had the gift to see spirits? I need to get to the bottom of this. Lelich picked up the phone again, this time dialing Anohana's number. Hello, Lamperouge Teiko. Is there any reason as to why you didn't contact me with a Hell Butterfly? This cannot wait for a Hell Butterfly to simply meet with you, Suteiko. I need a formal request straight away. Lelich spoke hurriedly. I will do my best to accommodate, if the request is within reason. I would like any and all reports forwarded to my desk in which there were holo attacks on Pendragon and / or civilian interaction on the parts of the representatives within the last 14 years, Lelich requested. I will send a request form narrowing down the search even further with specific coordinates and information ASAP. While your request is pending, shall I send Vera over to your office later? Why? Lelich asked. Verachan was in Pendragon as a representative 4 years ago. I know this because I read all of the profiles of every candidate to be my Fukotaiko at length, Anohana told Lelich. Yes, please send her over, I would appreciate that, Lelich said and hung up. He leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath as he thought about the small changes that had come to the Soul Society, especially in regards to nobility. Ever since Aizen had taken over, only to be thwarted later, nobility had suffered the most. Most houses and their members had been destroyed in the invasion. Many servants and noblemen stood stolidly like a gigantic army of ants to cover the escape of Kukaki Byakuya and Kazumioji Rurakiyo and her father, Jugen. Other noble families simply locked themselves in to protect themselves, and many were executed if they did not join Aizen's side of things, and most that remained standing did so out of fear and survival of the clan. Most of the others though, like the Omadas, had been killed in the battle against Ulquiorra. As Senna had mentioned to Ichigo, there were only 10 noble families left. Lelich could recall them all by memory: Kukaki, Shiba, Fiamata, Atramir, Dragmire, Kazumioji, Yukatake, Kiraku, Aloman, and Britannia. Lelich was disheartened that his namesake had withstood the attack, but he really hadn't expected any less. After all, though Zero Requiem had succeeded, his original plan had failed. Britannia still reigned supreme. At least Nunnally would be on the throne, that much he could be certain. After all, he was 99th emperor and she was his next of kin. By law, undesired or not, she would be put on the throne. Nunnally would be a good ruler, Lelich knew that. It was just a simple matter of her lasting long enough to show it. He wasn't worried though. Schneeisel supported her politically, and Suzaku, guised as Zero, was her direct bodyguard. If Lelich knew Nunnally well enough, he knew she'd have Cornelia reinstated as General-in-Chief of Britannia's army. And Cornelia would never let anything harm Nunnally. He knew the only reason she was contemptuous towards him towards the end was because Yuffie's blood was on his hands. Lelich was not oblivious to the fact though that Cornelia showed favor to his family. He was faithful that Nunnally would bring Britannia's image back to the Elizabethan era, which was Britannia at its prime. However, with this new mess brought to his attention, he now knew that keeping the time stream from unraveling might prove even harder. True, Pendragon was not an area normally dense with Reishi, but it was an imperial city and therefore could not be left unattended by Godiel law. If Cornelia had spiritual power, Lelich had to make certain he and she would not cross paths until after Zero Requiem. Cornelia could not turn out like Ichigo. That possibility simply could not come to light, ever. Lelich trusted Rurakiyo to do as he had asked though. After all, her decision to take up the sword and become a Soul Reaper was not one she made lightly. When Aizen invaded, Rurakiyo's bodyguards Ryusei Kenzaki and Rusaburo and Kogawa had joined the fray to cover Rurakiyo's escape. The Seirai communication had a short blurb in it that Rukiyo had a private funeral to honor them. They were the only two to accept such an honor from her personally out of all the servants, nobles, and distant family. Lelich remembered when Rurakiyo stormed into a captain's meeting, teary-eyed, and completely unannounced. Her new bodyguards had been inept at keeping her ladyship secure, and Rurakiyo had snuck off on her own and slipped by the guards and burst into the captain's hall, demanding to be made a Soul Reaper. She wanted to honor her fallen bodyguards. She was completely disruptive, and the soldiers outside the door that had failed to nab her when she sprinted up the steps were dragging her out, kicking and screaming when Anohana stopped them. Had Yamamoto still been Suteiku, he would have let Rurakiyo be dragged out, but Anohana had decided that she was going to run the Godei her way. She asked the guards to be gentler with Rurakiyo and hold her outside her office and have the girl wait for her there. Anohana knew that if she gave a direct order that it was never questioned. Yamamoto was rarely spoken out against because people were afraid of having their backs broken or questioning the old man who could literally set the Seirai on fire. However, with Anohana it was a case of, listen or suffer excruciating pain and torment. After the meeting, Anohana had a long talk with Rurakiyo. She started by giving her a stern lecture about bursting into a high-profile meeting unannounced and unwelcomed. She let Rurakiyo have it about her behavior. However, she then gave Rurakiyo credit for being able to slip past the entire Seirai and even make it to the captain's meeting on her own 2 feet. In short, she pulled the strings and, as with Senna, since all special training for nobles went through the Suteiku, had Rurakiyo signed up with a few personal trainers. Rurokiyo was disciplined heavily, and there were many nights and days that she was so exhausted that she wanted to quit. Sometimes she was even denied meals as per discipline. She even threw a tantrum whenever she was not treated with the respect she believed she deserved. However, whenever she wanted to quit, she would remember how Ryusei Kenryu Kenzaki and Rusaburo Inryu Kogawa, the nicknames were what Rurokiyo called them when she was much younger, gave their lives to protect her and she would never see them again, and how she wanted to honor them. She became complacent and she became disciplined. By the end of the winter, Rurokiyo had long since lost her demanding personality and she was affirmed by her trainers to be a competent warrior. In only a few short months, Rurokiyo was stronger than even some graduates. After all, Ryusei and Rusaburo had taught her a lot on their own, so it was a simple matter of what small things she remembered and putting them into practice. The other advantage, besides her nobility, an advantage she shared with Senna, was that Rurokiyo had a drive to keep her going. She wanted to change. Most people who became Soul Reapers had nowhere else to go or were forced to become ones. Rurokiyo was different. She wanted to learn anything she could. True, Rurokiyo still had a long way to go. She only knew basic Kido, Kendo, and Hakuda, but her execution was flawless in what she had been taught. Much like with Lelich's love life, Rurokiyo and Senna had spawned the newest bet between Renji, Rukia and Kion. The bet was, who would be the first to obtain Shikai. Renji was confident Rurokiyo would succeed, mostly cause she was a seated officer in his squad, 19th seat. Kion was more confident that Senna would succeed first because she had been a Soul Reaper longer and had already climbed to 18th seat in Division 10. Rukia on the other hand decided that by the time any of them knew about it that both girls would know the names of their Zanpakuto. The bet was the same, 500 gon apiece. Lelich was snapped from his thoughts by a knock to his door, which was open. He turned and smiled. "Speak of the devil. What can I do for you, Senna?" "Yukatake Fukutaiko is here. She won't say anything, but she, Ah yes, I was expecting her. Send her to me," Lelich requested. Senna left, and a few minutes later Vera entered Lelich's office. "Please close the door." Vera did as Lelich requested. "Have a seat," Lelich gestured to the chair in front of his desk. Vera sat down and Lelich leaned forward with his hands clasped together. "I understand you were once at an outpost in Pendragon, the imperial city of Britannia. Did I do something bad?" Vera asked, confused. No, nothing of the sort. I'm conducting an investigation, and you're just the first person I've spoken to," Lelich told Vera. "I need to know if there were any holo attacks or you had any civilian interaction, perhaps both." "One," Vera answered, "both. Same time. Tell me what happened." As one of the only people she would speak complete sentences to, Vera told Lelich the story. There was this flying holo that attacked this mansion. Nothing too strong, but the civilians inside were threatened. 3 of them. 2 females, 1 male. What did they look like? 2 of the civilians were babies, the other one she was a young girl. Describe her, Lelich stated. Dark purple hair, not as dark as Shiba Fukutaiko's. It was more vibrant. She looked physically older than Kusajishi Fukutaiko. She had blue eyes and she could see me, but I used the memory replacement device." "I see," Lelich stated. "Do you remember the coordinates?" "And no sir. I am sorry." Lelich took a deep breath. "I take it that means you didn't get the girl's name." "No sir. I am sorry. I did not speak to her. If I showed you a picture of this girl, would you be able to identify her?" Lelich asked. "I believe so," Vera responded. "All right, you're dismissed for now then." "Thank you." Okay," Vera stood up and was about to turn to leave, but before she did she asked. "You Lelich Teiko, before I go, is it okay to ask and to know what you are investigating?" "I'm investigating something related to my past." "Your past?" Vera was understandably confused. "If you really wish to know, the next time you talk to your brother, tell him." Lelich trailed off. "Yes, tell him, what?" "Tell him, an empress is murdered in her home, and tell him to finish the rest." He will understand the context. If he does not, tell him I told you to say that, and he definitely should. If he still doesn't, ask him of the story of my rebellion. Lelich Teiko's rebellion. He will understand. Okay. Vera then left Lelich's office. Lelich picked up the phone again and dialed for Anohana. Suteiko. Hi. Belay my request from earlier. I think I might have what I need. Hi, Wakata Mashita. Lelich hung up and dialed another number. Rurakiyo. Hi, Lamperouge Teiko. I need you to get physically close to the woman you saw today just once and take a photo of her. I need you to take it and send it to Kuratsuka Fukutaiko as a file with the name. Lelich will know what to do with this. Understood. We shall do as asked. Good, thank you. Oh, and Rurakiyo. Hi. I think Kenzaki and Inkogawa would be proud of you if they could see you now. There was a long pause. Thank you, Lamperouge Teiko. Lelich then heard Rurakiyo hang up on him. Lelich put the phone back on the receiver and sighed. So much for the rest of this decade being dull and boring. You really think it's her? Has fate ever been that kind? Point taken. Still, what does this mean? I don't know, but I'm sure we'll find out. If Vera and Rurakiyo's stories match up, and I'm 97% certain that they will, it means that my past is a lot more complicated than I originally thought, and my sister's origins were not as I originally remember. To be continued. Chapter 140, Cornelia's Discovery. Third-person POV. 12th Division. As per Lelich's request, Rurakiyo did manage to get a shot of Cornelia with her soul pager without being seen. With her success, Lelich dragged Vera into Nemu's office and asked if she recognized Cornelia. Vera, shy in the presence of anyone that was not the 10th Division captain, merely nodded in confirmation that she did, in fact, recognize Cornelia. I see. Thank you, Vera, you are dismissed. Vera nodded again and left, leaving Lelich and Nemu alone in the Fukutaiko's office. What does this mean? Nemu asked Lelich. It means that things are not as simple as I once envisioned. Nemu, I'm going to need your help with something over the next decade and a half. I live to serve, Lelich-sama. May 2005 ATB. At promptly 9 a.m., Cornelia's alarm clock went off. She promptly tapped it, rose from her queen-sized bed, grabbed her bedrobe and made for the bathroom. She hung her robe on the back of the door and discarded her nightgown as well into the laundry basket. She stepped into the shower and turned on the faucet, letting the water cover her body as she scrubbed herself clean. When she was finished, she stopped in the mirror to apply makeup and style her hair. Cornelia took pride in her appearance. She felt that just because she was a soldier didn't mean she had to look butch like several recruits she could name. Besides, both Marianne and Nonette did so. As she applied her lipstick, she vaguely recalled the time when she needed neither makeup nor a bra, and as she looked in the mirror she saw how much she was starting to grow in. She could hardly believe only years ago her chest was as flat as a board. Now she was certain she could become bigger than Nonette. Grabbing her towel and wrapping it around herself, Cornelia walked back to her room to get dressed. She slipped on her panties and C-cup bra before opening her wardrobe and taking down her uniform off the hanger and putting it on and making sure it was aligned properly. She exited her room and patted herself down to make sure she had everything. Wallet? Check. Cell phone? Check. Wristwatch? Check. Radio communicator and earpiece? Check. She was good to go. Cornelia headed downstairs for breakfast, where Yuffie was munching on a buttered biscuit while watching morning cartoons. Cornelia poured herself a glass of milk and saw that the rest of her breakfast was already prepared for her by the servants. If there was one luxury Cornelia felt she benefited from, it was having hired servants. Cornelia never took her lavish lifestyle for granted, of course. As a soldier, Cornelia sympathized with the common folk, as did her mother. The Lee Britannia house had always been a people-first household, as it were. Or so Dolores claimed. While it was true she paid her servants well for their work and had thrown more parties than Cornelia had run drills, or so Cornelia felt was the case, she always seemed so fussy, as if she was entitled to her status and the luxury she lived in because she was such a people person. Cornelia had a different outlook on life, Always had. Mostly it was due to the fact of how she idolized Marianne, who had been more of a mother to Cornelia than Dolores had ever been. Marianne had taken care of Cornelia as a bodyguard and babysitter since as long as Cornelia could remember. When Marianne spoke, Cornelia listened. Nonette too didn't have the same cushy upbringing many in Cornelia's position took for granted. Therefore Cornelia took it upon herself to be a symbol not just to nobility, but to all people of the nation. She wanted to be recognized as a woman that her nation could point to and say, she is a hero. Doing anything interesting today? Yuffie asked Cornelia, now aware of her presence. Not that I'm aware, Cornelia responded. Besides the incident with the terrorists in the EU embassy little over a year ago, Cornelia hadn't seen much official action. She didn't resent combat, but any day Cornelia could watch go by peacefully was a day she knew she could come home and see her sister's smiling face and, most of all, that was all Cornelia wanted out of life. She had long since discarded her silly childish ambition of saying she was going to be the next general-in-chief. She was just a soldier of Britannia, and all she wanted to do was serve her country, make her idol proud of her and see Yuffie's smiling face in the evenings she was in Pendragon. That was really all she wanted. She didn't even care about the arms race for the throne. If anything, Cornelia would sooner put up propaganda for Schneeisel to take their father's throne. As long as her sister Guinevere didn't become the next empress, Cornelia felt she'd be fine with a change in leadership. To say Cornelia hated her older sister would be like saying that Lelich was better than Clovis at chess. Lelich wasn't better, he was ungodly compared to Clovis. Cornelia once drew a comic of her older sister in a devil costume with a forked tongue, red eyes, and fangs with herself descending from heaven and shooting Guinevere. She did this during her first year at the academy. Everything that Cornelia was, Guinevere was not. She was bossy, rude, snobbish, and took her lifestyle for granted. She looked down on the common folk and walked with a swagger in her step that common people would expect from nobility. At several parties Cornelia would find her right hand unconsciously groping the empty air by her right hip side where a gun normally was outside formal parties. To make it worse, Guinevere was probably the most popular member of the Brighton household, a fact that Cornelia couldn't stand. She often saw Guinevere in the company of several men who carried her around as she sat in a chair. It was like she was above the streets. Cornelia had several fantasies about her sister's karma catching up to her, like getting an STD or pregnant, suddenly told by their father that she and Cornelia had to trade lifestyles for a day, and then Cornelia would sit back eating grapes while Guinevere got shot and killed by enemy troops. And of course, Cornelia's favorite, her sister's house suddenly collapsing and Guinevere becoming a servant of the Lee Britannia household and essentially Cornelia's bitch. Cornelia scared herself sometimes how devious and slightly erotic that fantasy could get in some daydreams. Finishing her breakfast, Cornelia pecked Yuffie on the cheek goodbye before heading back upstairs to the bathroom to brush her teeth and rinsed her mouth before heading out the front door and grabbing her white gloves in front of the stables. She walked over to Luna and rubbed the mare's left front leg before pulling herself up onto the horse and snapping the reins. "Yeah." Luna reared back and whinnied before galloping out of the stables towards the military base. Cornelia preferred travel by horseback rather than getting into a limo and being escorted. With Nonette's recent promotion to lieutenant colonel, she no longer worked in the house all the time and therefore couldn't act as Cornelia's personal escort to HQ. Cornelia also preferred to be self-sufficient whenever she could. That's not to say she didn't appreciate the work the servants did or that she rather would be a one-woman army than have troops to order around, but Cornelia simply liked having that feeling of being the one in charge and in control of any given situation. Unless it was an order from a commanding officer, she would fight if that control was somehow robbed from her. Cornelia arrived at the station at 11:15 and tied Luna up outside. She found one of her men and requested her horse's needs be attended to. Grunt work like the incident the summer she became first lieutenant to be sure, but Cornelia's men were loyal to her to a fault. They understood that their captain's young age meant some unorthodox occurrences and they were okay with that, especially since Cornelia promised that once she could drive she'd use a family car rather than Luna to get here anyway, so it was only for a few more years. Cornelia also knew that Luna was getting old. She regretted when that fateful day would come when she'd have to lead Luna out into the woods with one hand and carrying a shotgun with the other, or calling the glue factory. Cornelia was attached to her horse, they'd been through a lot together. The black mare had been Cornelia's steed for over 2 years now, and Cornelia knew she'd be with Luna for another 2 years, maybe more. Just because she got her license didn't mean she'd neglect her faithful companion. Cornelia simply felt that there was no greater feeling than the wind blowing through her hair, not to mention that Luna could take shortcuts off-road, and she challenged anyone to find a vehicle that could scale up the side of a mountain by jumping from cliff to cliff. Besides just transport to base, Luna satisfied this uncanny need. Cornelia had to go adventuring in the woods and trekking to the highest point she could find and watch the scenery. Cornelia went inside the base as the guards outside saluted to her, and she checked in with the front desk and headed down the stairs to the shooting gallery and locker room. Cornelia kept all of her firearms in her locker except for a 9mm she left underneath her bed with the ammo in a strong box on the night table. Cornelia felt it was always best to be prepared. Sure, any mansion of the royal family had more security than a national bank vault, but Cornelia had the mentality of leaving nothing to chance. She unlocked her locker, grabbed her equipment and headed out to the gallery practice her aim and to test her ability to handle kickback. Ever since her growth spurt last November, Cornelia had started training herself with a .45 caliber. Other than having a much easier time loading and reloading the ammo clips, she wasn't noticing much difference except for the kickback in her arm. After unloading the current ammo clip she had, she set the pistol she was holding down on the table next to her and picked up the shotgun she had borrowed from the armory. She hooked the end of the gun into her shoulder and took aim. She fired and the shot went completely off her mark. She had to get better at this. She might have been young, but she needed to be able to use something other than a handgun if she wanted to be a true soldier, and killing her arms by training them to handle the kickback of larger weapons was her only option. She fired 2 more rounds from the heavy weapon, both shots going completely in the wrong direction, only for the red alert alarm to go off. "I didn't cause that," Cornelia voiced loudly, and then grabbed her weapons and ran to grab her earpiece from her locker. "This is Lieutenant Lee Britannia. Give me the 411. Lieutenant, this is Colonel Hanks. We have a group of terrorists tearing their way up north towards Pendragon. They're about a few kilometers out of the city. We have a perimeter formed up to stop them, but I don't know how well it's going to go. The Air Force has a hold on them right now." "Understood. I'm on my way," Cornelia declared. She ran as fast as she could and noticed an RV with a gun mounted onto it pulling away. Cornelia stuck 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled. The soldiers heard her call and slowed down a little bit to let Cornelia catch up and jump in. At the perimeter, Cornelia watched from afar as she could see the gunship high in the air shooting at a target below. "Do these idiots really think they're going to make it into Pendragon like that?" one of the soldiers scoffed. "I know, right? Bunch of morons," one of the others said, taking a light. Cornelia, however, was on edge. Something's not right about this. She watched the gunship's pattern and noticed as she watched it that it was flying around in circles for 20 minutes. "It's like they're not even trying to make their way towards us." Cornelia gasped, thinking something dreadful. "Colonel, please tell me we have a few soldiers inside the capital." "What are you panicking for? I have a horrific feeling theirs." Cornelia was cut off by a far-off explosion. "Colonel, I'm hearing you, Lieutenant, and I heard that explosion. Take a team and find out what's going on." "Affirmative," Cornelia said. "I need 2 more vehicles with me. We're investigating that explosion." With a team of 15 men, Cornelia led a group towards the source of the explosion. As she had feared, the terrorists drawing the Air Force's attention was a decoy. While the terrorists' main force ran amok through the slum-mire part of town, had come in inconspicuously, dressed in normal clothing, looking like migrant workers, but shooting up the place. Cornelia immediately began shouting out orders, breaking her unit into 3 groups according to the car they had come in. Group A's job was crowd control. Group B had the job of looking for survivors in hard-to-reach places and shooting any terrorist that got in the way. Group C, the group that Cornelia had come with, had the job of murdering the terrorists currently laying waste to the neighborhood. Yanking the slide to ready her gun, Cornelia ran forward into the fray and began tagging terrorists on sight. Telling friend from foe was a fairly simple process. Anyone armed that was not in uniform was an obvious target. However, armed with only 1 weapon, her pistol, and limited ammo, Cornelia found herself without ammunition after killing only 3 enemies, and by her estimation there had to be at least 5 times that many. She radioed to her team to check the death count. She didn't let it slip that she was out of ammo to keep morale up, but she only counted 11 deaths including the men she killed, and there had to be well over 15 terrorists by her estimation based on the number of blown-up buildings and the type of manpower that it would take to pull something like this off without being spotted by the Brighton Neon police at some point. The 3 men she had been fighting were using heavier weaponry than Cornelia's fragile frame could handle, so that now she was stuck without ammunition and without a melee weapon, or grenades. She was down to just her fists. "Brilliant, Cornelia, kill a bunch of terrorists by punching them out," the second princess chastised herself. As Cornelia weighed her options from behind what she thought was safe cover, a car's headlights turned on from across the other side of the parking garage. She currently had her back to the support beam of. From the car, a bunch of shots rang out, indicating Cornelia was being shot at from terrorists inside the car. Running around behind the support beam, Cornelia heard the car rev up and charge towards her. She leapt out of the way and rolled, as she dove forward to increase distance. Cornelia figured the support beam had to be made of plaster since it shattered from the charging metal beast's momentum and the whole parking garage tilted forward. The car came barreling towards her like a runaway ice cream truck, all the while the man hanging out the passenger side door was taking shots at her and missing, but coming deadly close. He grazed her shoulder at one point, but didn't hit any skin. "Shit!" Cornelia cursed. Knowing she only had one option, she ran towards the terrorist firing on her and leapt up and onto the car. She impacted on the roof and running behind it, forcing the driver to make a sharp turn if he wanted to follow her, which he did. "I need a weapon, damn it." If Cornelia had no other option, she would have let the car chase her around and played this game of cat and mouse until she managed to grab the gun of her would-be assailant, or maybe break into the back seat and pistol whip the passenger and driver and get out of the vehicle before it crashed. However, fate was going to be kind enough to give Cornelia another option. As she grabbed her pistol, prepared to throw it at the oncoming car and hopefully knock the weapon out of the passenger's hand as it sailed into him, the weapon's grip and empty magazine suddenly began to glow with a fierce violet light. Cornelia had no time to contemplate what happened as the car came towards her like a trucker breaking the speed limit. Feeling as if everything was in slow motion again, her eyes straining themselves and giving Cornelia a superior perception of reality, the Britannia woman rolled out of the way and ran towards the tilted garage and the wreckage of cars laying down in front of it and began examining her gun. She unhooked the empty magazine and looked at the bullets inside it, or rather, expected to look at bullets. The entire magazine was as heavy as a full one, but instead of bullets, it was completely filled with a solid purple mass of which Cornelia had no idea what it was, or if the gun could fire it. The car stood still as Cornelia stood atop the pile of cars. A trained soldier would have tried to shoot the gas tanks and take Cornelia with the wrecked vehicles, but the terrorists obviously never had any military training, and thus began to try and tag Cornelia, all while missing terribly, afraid to get closer to the gas-leaking vehicles. It was something Cornelia was betting on when she headed in this direction. "I guess there's only one way to find out if this will work or not." She lifted her arm up, back and then bent it forward, taking aim at the hood of the car below her. She clicked the hammer and pulled the trigger. Instantly a small sphere of glowing purple energy went speeding towards the car, which to the driver and passenger only appeared as some small glowing object. Cornelia felt her body twitch a bit, not understanding that she had just used her own inner strength to create that projectile. She didn't know it, but Cornelia's own latent spiritual power had unlocked the ability to create bottomless magazines, assuming she had the stamina to keep firing, of course. As a soldier though, she had plenty to spare. The blast went rocketing towards the roof of the car, where it caused an explosion the size of one of the tires. The car went up in flames and the passenger and driver dove out of the burning vehicle and landed on ground, rolling around in the dirt to put out the fire on their clothes. Cornelia leapt from her perch and landed clean on her feet. She saw the 2 terrorists get up and make their way towards her. With a casual, stoic glance she aimed at one and fired. She hit him in the shoulder and tore his arm right off at the socket from the force of the blast. It was like she was firing those special saccharide-enhanced bullets that Marianne had tested a few years ago. A bullet suddenly lodged in her bulletproof vest reminded Cornelia of her other assailant, and she tagged him in the head with her gun, blowing his head up to giblets of blood and flesh. The rest of the body collapsed on the ground, bleeding out. Her other attacker had bled out by this point, and Cornelia, now clear of all hostiles, felt the adrenaline rush leave her. Lee Brighton, in. The static from Cornelia's communicator radio alerted her to it on her person, and she grabbed hold of it. Lieutenant Lee Britannia speaking. Lieutenant, we've managed to get a combined death total of 18 now. Have you killed any more of them yourself? 2 terrorists down on my end, soldier. Do we have estimation as to a total? Ma'am, we recovered intelligence that would have us believe that those last 2 are the last of the bunch. Do you require assistance, or should I inform the colonel myself? No, I'm unharmed. I can handle it. No medical treatment needs to be sent this way. Understood, Lieutenant. Franklin over and out. Cornelia decided she'd leave the area in a bit. She looked around the war-torn area and clicked her empty gun. Nothing happened. What was that just now? Cornelia wondered, glancing down at her weapon. That's the second time now I've felt powerful. Just how exactly did I do that? Soul Society. 12th Division. Lelich watched the scene unfold before him through a small robotic fly the department of the development used for reconnaissance, either alongside, instead of, or independent of the On Mitsukido. Lelich was standing idly watching the aftermath of Cornelia's battle, with Nemia watching with him. She is certainly a strong warrior. Yes. Lelich said, and walked over to one of the monitors that were gathering data on Cornelia's biological and spiritual structure through special camera lenses and programs. The data didn't lie. She had definitely used some form of spiritually powered technique to fire an empty gun and do that much damage. You said this woman's name was Lee Britannia Cornelia, yes? Hi, Lelich answered as he went back to staring at the visual monitor. Why is she of such interest to you? Nemu asked. If you keep up observing, you will find out. Thank you for helping me with this, by the way. I appreciate it, despite what I've done to you. I owe you for more than you realize, Nemu said, looking up from her seat, towards him. No matter what, I am here to help you, Lelich-sama. You are too kind, Lelich said with a pleased smile, eyes momentarily closed. If I am, it is because you helped make me this way, Nemu responded. Lelich grinned like an idiot in response, knowing just how true that was. Clearing his throat and returning to his business-like scowl, Lelich struck up a new conversation as he continued to observe his half-sister. How's working under Jinbin for you? Ichimaru Teiko has been much more benevolent than Mayuri-sama. Not just to me, but to all the other division members. Unlike my father, Jin-sama doesn't let corruption slip by beneath the radar. He's been very good at turning people over to the On Mitsukido. Knowing Jin, he probably just enjoys busting everyone more so than he is doing it out of the goodness of his heart. Either way, he's doing a good thing. We've had 67 division members removed from office since his arrival. Doesn't that make you a little undermanned? Lelich asked. Not quite. The 3rd Division has been sending out flyers and ad campaigns through the use of the CRIDI communication to get recruitment up, and in the meantime we're getting transfers from other divisions, and Jin-sama is finding hidden talent in lower-ranked officers. It will take a long time, but Soul Society will get back on its feet. That is certainly true, Lelich agreed. Aizen cost us a lot of good men. It will take until Zero Requiem before we can face another threat like that one again. Of course, I doubt we'll have to. My Hollow was defeated by me. That should be the last major threat we have to face for a long time. East Britannia, New Yorkshire. October 3, 2005 ATB. During the summer, Cornelia had put in an application for the most powerful handgun she could get her hands on, and requested that her ammunition would be packed with the special Sakuradite bullets. She had also requested a custom fit to her hand to make it easier to handle the kickback. She had practiced with it all summer and was in the shooting range with it now, using normal ammo to save the special ammo for live targets. It was the one time Cornelia thanked her status as a princess, because the dividend for getting what she needed would have been considered pricey to anyone that was not a noble. For Cornelia, however, it was well worth the expense, and she didn't do it just to have it. She didn't want to panic about the fact that she could fire bizarre ammunition with powerful damage output coming to light. She had no idea what was slowly happening to her, and it bothered her to no end. No one would know the difference if Cornelia was out or low on ammunition when she had to order more, since after a few shots of practice with the special ammunition there was no difference in firepower between her handgun and those odd rounds from before. The cartridge for her gun had 9 bullets each, and Cornelia, to be prepared, was planning on bringing a few spares with her permission. Cornelia had tried to replicate what had happened, but had failed to do so in the last couple of months. She had spent some time trying to figure out why she was only capable of what she considered both superhuman/supernatural feats during those 2 specific instances, trying to find some sort of commonality. Cornelia found 2: high determination and fear of failure. Cornelia found she could only get that kind of surge in a life or death crisis, and lately she'd just been at this outpost just because those were her orders. Cornelia missed being closer to home out west towards the center of the nation. She enjoyed being able to be a soldier by day and a big sister by night. Out at this outpost she constantly had to stay at base for the evening, and she didn't even have Nonet to make those evenings less dull. Every soldier Cornelia's unit came with her to this outpost, and Nonet had been asked to make a selection of a platoon to send out by talking to the captain of one of the battalions under her command. In recent months Nonet reached the rank of lieutenant colonel. The tall soldier was making quite the name for herself in the army. She certainly didn't have Cornelia's tactical genius, which she hadn't had much of a chance to make use of, but Nonet was one of the best soldiers of her rank and age. Cornelia finished her shooting practice and headed up from the underground facility to go to the barracks to rest up. As she lay down on her bed she began thinking of days at the academy and how in the current situation it would be a few moments before Nonet would loom over her and call out, "He null IEEE?" in a sing-song voice just like that. Wait. What? Cornelia bolted upright immediately to see the lieutenant colonel herself standing in her room, smiling at her. "What, Nonet, what are you doing here?" Nonet placed her head on Cornelia's head and rubbed it vigorously as she grinned. "What? Didn't Captain Weiss tell you when he sent you here?" Nonet stood up straight and pointed at herself with her thumb. "This is my outpost. I'm in charge here." "Then where have you been? Why haven't I seen you?" "I've been here for weeks," Cornelia asked, both excited and a little bit confused. Nonet folded her arms. "I've had to take care of official business at the capital and other political nonsense that's kept me away from here. I had to ship out another platoon to the Falkland Islands. Things are getting restless down there. General Darlton says that General-in-Chief Anardas expects rebellion there soon. General Darlton told me I had to bring another platoon here from Pendragon, which he considered overstaffed at the moment, so I talked to Captain Weiss and had you shipped out. I also had to oversee a few things in the Falkland Islands since the platoon I sent was under my command, and I wanted to make sure with Colonel Hanks that everything was a go." Good old Colonel Hanks. I'm surprised he hasn't retired yet. Scuttlebutt says he wants to die a soldier and not an old coot in a retirement home somewhere. It's also rumored that if rebellion does break out that he might be one of the first to go. He's getting old, like several decades older than General Darlton. The general isn't that old. He's at least 10 years the Emperor's junior. There you go, calling him the Emperor again. Why are you always so formal with your own father? You'd understand if you were born into my family, Nonet. I might. Nonet took a seat at Cornelia's desk. She crossed her legs and put her hands on her knees. It's really nice to see you, Nellie. I'm glad you're here. The friendly smiling would have continued for a few more minutes if the red alert alarm didn't start blaring. Oh, I hope this is a drill, Nonet said, getting to her feet. Come on, Nellie. Debriefing room. Right behind you. There were several soldiers huddled around a virtualization of the outpost map as Nonet and Cornelia entered the room, and Nonet switched the alarm off. What's the situation? Lieutenant Colonel, you are not going to believe this, but I swear it's true. The man in the sergeant's uniform exclaimed. Out with it, soldier. I don't know how, but those bloody terrorists got their hands on one of our tanks. He used the virtual map to indicate what had been happening. They've been shooting up corporate buildings for the last hour. Only now did one of our men get back here to tell us that. Poor Sod lost half his right ear getting here. Do we know where the tank came from? Nonet asked. We can debate finer details later, I think, Cornelia spoke up, Right now we should get out there and stop that damn thing. Nonet nodded in agreement. A stolen tank was not something that could be debated about. Lives were at stake. Take your platoon and get out there. Nonet commanded to Cornelia and pointed to the door. This is why you're here over any others. Ma'am, yes ma'am. Cornelia saluted and ran down the corridor to exit the base. Cornelia grabbed her radio. I need all units on site, repeat all units on site. We have a crisis situation on our hands and I need everything we can muster. All units at base grab all the RPGs and sniper rifles we have in stock and set up at specific locations I will give when on site. All other units begin crowd control, unless you are told otherwise. There is a stolen tank, and we have to take it out. Cornelia then began shouting out detailed orders and instructions, positioning her troops in order to be able to flank the tank from any and all sides with the rocket-propelled grenades, and the snipers were in case the tank wasn't the only threat and there were some wandering troops next to it or about the city. Cornelia herself, armed with only her handgun, figured she may as well be firing spitwads unless it turned out there were normal terrorists running about. From an optimal position up on an apartment complex rooftop, Cornelia used binoculars to try and find the tank and communicate with her troops. When all her troops were in position, Cornelia buzzed Nonet. Something the matter, Lieutenant? Cornelia was shocked by the formal way Nonet was regarding her, but then again Nonet always seemed to slip into hypercompetence when things became serious. Is it possible to track the tank at all? I know you and Sergeant Adams had an idea of its movement, but try and see if you can hone in on it. It's one of ours, so tracking it should be within the realm of the possible. On it. From her vantage point, Cornelia waited for updates until she got a radio message. Lieutenant, we've got visual and are opening fire. Good. Do it. Belay that order, Lieutenant. The radio message came in from a husky-sounding male. General Darlton. Cornelia would have recognized his voice anywhere. The General-in-Chief knows what's going on over there, and he wants that tank recovered if possible. You can't be serious. Cornelia bit back. Those are the orders. Cornelia growled. As much as she wanted to say fuck that and go along with her plan of blow the tank up together with the passengers inside it, the if possible meant that if she didn't at least try to recover the tank, she'd be in hot water. Cornelia was a loyal soldier. She obeyed her orders. All RPG units retreat for base for Sakuradite ammo, if we have any. All sniper units remain on standby. I need some crowd control units to report in. Several soldiers voiced that they were listening and awaiting orders. I need you with me shadowing the tank, and we're going to see if we can't pop the latch and see if there are any stragglers with it. After all, a tank by itself is just a big target. That's affirmative, Lieutenant. I already shot one of those bastards walking alongside the tank, a random soldier radioed. Good job, soldier. Cornelia praised and then returned to addressing her other men. You hear that, soldiers? We have some stragglers. Pick 'em up. Snipers cover us. Stay behind the tank if you can. Most of the streets are too narrow for it to turn. Yes, Your Highness. Cornelia clicked her gun. The things I'm forced to do. Yeah, this hardly seems like suicide at all. Cornelia sighed silently. Lieutenant. Nonet radioed her. You have tracking enabled. Affirmative. It's at the coming up on 10th Avenue by way of 56th Street. Roger that. Those of you joining the fray do circle westward around the area and avoid being seen, or wait for a signal to know that it's past the location. Yes, ma'am. Plan set in motion, Cornelia left her vantage point and made her way out into the streets. She was at 11th and 50th. She had some walking to do. She was now sort of regretting she left Luna behind at home, but she couldn't drag her here anyway because Luna was personal property for optional military use and not part of the military herself. Cornelia kept up a steady pace as she headed to the proper location, slowing down when she reached 54th to do proper sneaking. She asked for radio silence unless absolutely necessary as she and the other troops made their approach. Now, how do we pop the lid on this tin can? Cornelia's first idea was to open fire with the men siding up along the slow-moving tank and let the chaos ensue along with cover fire from her snipers until ammunition arrived to make it possible to burst open the tank and invade. She'd lose several men in the attempt, including some of her snipers when the tank's gun blasted them out of vantage. Thankfully, Cornelia's second idea was a lot more promising, but a lot more difficult to enable. If only I could do what I did the last 2 times I was in a jam. I know it's not a desperate situation right now. I could call the general and say we can't do this and call in a demo expert to blow the tank to bits, and I've still got plenty of options, but if I could just harness that power from before. Sweat dripped down the side of Cornelia's face as she thought about it. A pulse ran through her body. This is it. That sensation. Detail on the horizon expanded and Cornelia felt like she was looking at real life through a high-definition lens. The sensation left her as she lost focus on it. Wait. I can do this willingly just by desire and concentration. A light bulb went off in her head. Of course. Cornelia looked down at her unarmed hand. Somehow I'm able to tap into the adrenaline coursing through my body and enhance it just through focused concentration. Could this perhaps have something to do with the fact that I can see ghosts and those weird people in black robes? She shook her head side to side to prevent herself from going off on a tangent. I can worry about the whys later. I have a job to do. Tensing her body, Cornelia willfully activated what she was going to nickname her hyper-focus ability. All right, that's done. As long as my concentration holds, I think I can maintain this state. I don't know if my own bullets will be enough to pierce the tank hood, but goddamn, I have to try. Rushing forward, Cornelia got into position on 56th to spot the tank as it passed by 11th and proceeded towards 12th. Immediately Cornelia grabbed the radio and began shouting out orders. She entered into the fray and began opening fire onto the surrounding enemies. Her special ammunition was a death blow to any enemy she hit. I need 1 soldier on my 6. We're going to hijack the tank. Cornelia ordered. An anonymous brave soldier heeded Cornelia's order and Cornelia ran up the back of the tank as the gun began to turn towards her, but moved too slow to catch the royal soldier. She landed atop the tank and found the hatch. She blasted her guns straight into it, blasting the lid straight off. She then dropped down into the hold and rather than use her gun and risk damaging the tank's equipment, she took all 3 terrorists down in unarmed combat like they had any other choice either if they wanted to keep the thing functioning and left them unconscious in the tank. Cornelia's body was not toned enough to lift fully grown men, and even she was surprised about how hard she could hit a full-grown man since she was only a teenager with military training and men were biologically stronger than women, so she had that disadvantage. Even so, her speed and reflexes surpassed them enough that she got out of the scrap with only a few blows and no face shots. She turned the tank off and ordered her follower to take controls and toss the bodies out into the streets to be brought in for questioning. She then got out of the tank and stood next to the cannon barrel surveying the scene and watching as the other terrorists fled with their tails between their legs. Let none escape, pursue, and kill. Cornelia ordered. We have 3 prisoners from the tank. Show these cowards no mercy. The cowardice of course was in the best interest of the troops now that the tank was overtaken, but if Cornelia could retake the tank they had the option to try and re-steal it. Cornelia had nothing but contempt for gutless cowards that couldn't fight a straight-up battle, and she drew a line between tactical retreat and pure cowardice. 2 of her men came up to her as she slid off the side of the tank. Take this thing back to base. Cornelia reloaded her gun. I have some terrorists to hunt. Cornelia took off down the street chasing one particular terrorist. Though her concentration was high, she did keep missing as he ducked around corners, and the distance between them made it hard for Cornelia to aim with just a pistol. Turning his head every so often, the dark-skinned bald terrorist kept trying to see if Cornelia was giving up or continuing her pursuit. He watched her fire and narrowly miss a few shots as he ran. He counted the gaps between reloading shots. She had 9 shots per clip and she was down to her last clip. Cornelia was becoming increasingly frustrated as she couldn't get proper accuracy on her target. She had been standing still while firing to tag the other terrorists earlier. Running at top speed and aiming at the same time proved difficult with such a mighty caliber pistol. Cornelia stopped firing for a moment and had an idea. Sniper units. If you see me coming, fire a warning shot in front of my target on my signal only. Cornelia knew the layout of New Yorkshire fairly well and planned to run her man into a trap. Her plan worked effortlessly and she saved some ammunition, casually taking a shot, not caring if she missed or not, knowing she'd win this hunt eventually, just to keep her target on his toes. Cornelia pursued and finally saw her prize, a septic tank lined up alongside a building. Her man was too far away for instant death, but he did get caught in the explosion and buried somewhat under some rubble. Cornelia took this opportunity to catch up with him. The terrorist had his leg pinned underneath a slab of paved street and his shotgun that he had been carrying was just outside his reach and he was reaching towards it as Cornelia got within a close enough range that she slowed her pace and then kicked the gun away and took aim with her pistol. Ah! She wagged a disapproving finger. She then stepped on the terrorist's hand. She smiled as to how this situation was something she always wanted to do and she wasn't going to squander it. Now I know what you're thinking. Did she fire 9 shots or only 8? Seeing as how my gun can make it so that it's raining you after it hits you and I'm down to my last ammo clip, ask yourself, do you feel lucky? Cornelia said only to smirk in a faint, but familiar purple glow encased her gun. Unfortunately for you, Cornelia clicked the hammer and prepared to fire, it doesn't matter. She fired straight into the target's stomach with one of her special spiritual bullets and all that was left of him was his disembodied leg. The rest of him was reduced to pieces. A military jeep pulled up to Cornelia as she stood there amongst the wreckage with Nonet as one of the passengers. Cornelia walked towards Nonet with a victorious smile and saluted when she got close. We've taken 3 men hostage. All other enemies are dead. Nonet tilted her head to indicate for Cornelia to jump in the car. Hop in. Cornelia climbed in next to her best friend and looked at the gun in her hand that still had a single bullet in it. Her enemy wasn't the only one that was counting shots. You think I'll get a promotion for this? Cornelia asked as she and Nonet drove by. Depends on what General Darlton says, but I'll recommend it. Drinks later. You know it. Cornelia wasn't old enough to drink, but Nonet usually got plastered while Cornelia had either cider or a soda. Nonet drinking off her ass was always a spectacle. Cornelia always hung around to make sure her friend didn't get so loopy that she took off all her clothes and tried to bang anything that moves. Nonet was never violent while drunk. She was either happy or loopy, even more so than some of the other soldiers. Cornelia sometimes felt like she was missing out on experiences because of her age. She couldn't drink and she couldn't drive either. What she wouldn't have given to fire at the terrorists using the tank as they tried to flee. Still, she knew she wanted to be a soldier. It was rough, but Cornelia took a very adolescent sick satisfaction in knowing that she could commit murder and she'd pay no consequences. As she pondered it though, it frightened her a little, wondering if that made her a bad person. Nonet, seeming to sense this from the downcast look on Cornelia's face, put her arm around her friend and pushed her head against her chest, confusing Cornelia for a moment. The only thing that marks a good or bad soldier is competence. There's no such thing as morality in war. We carry out justice and order and defend the country we live in. You're lucky you can mostly stomach killing at your age. Many of the soldiers I have underneath me don't want to kill even though it's their duty. You were an excellent roommate, Nellie, and you're an excellent soldier. Be proud of yourself. Cornelia smiled and then put her head on Nonet's lap, feeling exhausted, frowning a little because she was so exhausted. If she was older she wouldn't be this tired. And don't be in such a hurry to be an adult. You've known what that's like once a month since your 2nd year at the academy. Cornelia did her best not to laugh. You're fine the way you are, Nellie. If you stay the way you are, then you're a better person than many others around you. Miss Marianne would be proud of you if you stay the same as you are. Cornelia smiled. You always know how to bring a smile to my face. I lived with you for 3 years. Nonet put a hand on Cornelia's shoulder and rubbed it. You're like a sister to me, Nellie, the one I never had. Thanks, Nonnet. Cornelia said. Taking a while to fall asleep and with the moon and stars starting to come out, Cornelia asked, why did you become a soldier? Well, a bunch of reasons, I guess, serving our country, wanting to make a difference and all that, but I'm guessing you're talking about personal reasons. Nonet thought about it for a minute and then answered with, I guess because I love this world and the people in it, and I want to protect it. This was the best way I knew how. Cornelia fell asleep in Nonette's lap and began snoring. The elder woman smiled and stroked Cornelia's hair before reaching behind her into the open trunk and tossing a blanket over the lieutenant. Rest up, Nellie, you earned it. End of chapter 140. Check the description for the links to the author.